Chapter 1430, Destroying the Town's Defenses in One Hit. Chapter 1430, Destroying the Town's Defenses in One Hit. A large number of guild players had been stationed atop Green Rain Town's ramparts. At the base of the walls, the Shadow Dragon Legion stood in neat, orderly rows. As expected of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's trump card Legion. Its members are so strong. Just looking at them makes me shudder. Guild Leader Fox, with them here you won't have to lift a finger. The Shadow Dragon Legion will bring a swift end to Zero Wing's force. That's right. It's a pity that we won't get to join in. I'd like to show Zero Wing how powerful our guilds truly are. The various upper echelons on the ramparts chatted merrily as they gazed down at the Shadow Dragon Legion. Even if there weren't 180,000 elite players protecting Green Rain Town, Zero Wing's 1,000-man army would fail. After all, the NPC guards weren't just for display. Unfortunately, since the Shadow Dragon Legion had wanted the front line, their guilds had lost the chance to use Zero Wing as a stepping stone to improve their reputations in the Empire. Suddenly, Lonely Castle walked up to Crimson Fox and reported, "Guild Leader, a report just came in. For some reason, Zero Wing's members have stopped their advance and fortified a hill some distance away from the town. They've locked down the area around the hill. We sent several assassins to investigate, but they've all died." Hearing this, Crimson Fox and the other upper echelons were stunned. Why are they fortifying that hill? The same question floated in everyone's minds. This was the first time they had encountered such a shameless guild. Zero Wing had boldly announced its plan to raid Green Rain Town, yet after such claims, it had only dispatched a little over 1,000 members. Now, for some unknown reason, Zero Wing's members had decided to halt their advance halfway. They're not approaching? Crimson Fox's lips curled. It seems Zero Wing's upper echelons still have some brainpower. They realize that charging into the town would be suicidal, so they've decided to wait for us to come to them? Guild Leader, should we send some of our people? Lonely Castle asked. No need. We'll let the Shadow Dragon Legion deal with it. We can save ourselves from the trouble of being called out for bullying, Crimson Fox said, laughing. Although he did not know what Zero Wing was trying to do in front of absolute strength, all trickery was useless. At the end of the day, Crimson Castle would win this war, and Zero Wing's reputation in the Black Dragon Empire would be ruined. However, as the Shadow Dragon Legion prepared to set off for the hill, two spiraling black and white beams appeared in the distance. Both beams struck the magic barrier around Green Rain Town a split second after they appeared, tearing through it as if it were paper. Boom. In the end, the two massive beams plowed through the town's center. Two towering pillars of light rose from the craters, expanding until each covered a 500-yard radius. One could see these pillars even from tens of thousands of yards away. Both pillars gradually dissipated, leaving two 40-meter deep craters. Everything that had been caught within the light pillars had disappeared. What? For a moment, every player in Green Rain Town was dumbfounded as they stared at the void the light pillars had left. The various guild upper echelons stared with wide eyes. What had happened? Was the sky falling? Not even Crimson Fox knew what had just transpired. Although the defensive magic array protecting Green Rain Town was only basic rank, it could survive Tier 3 attacks, yet it failed to resist the two beam attacks. I investigate that attack immediately, Crimson Fox bellowed. Crimson Fox's heart bled over the buildings the attacks had just destroyed, not to mention the number of players that had died. Crimson Castle's members exploded into action. Guild Leader, it seems that those two beams came from the hilltop Zero Wing occupies, Lonely Castle said as he pointed towards the hill. So you're saying, that is Zero Wing's doing? A chill ran down Crimson Fox's spine as he stared at the hilltop, astonishment flashing in his eyes as he muttered, "How is this possible?" He had investigated Zero Wing thoroughly, so he knew that Zero Wing possessed powerful war weapons. However, the hill Zero Wing occupied was over 10,000 yards away from Green Rain Town. According to the reports, Zero Wing's war weapons should only have a maximum range of around 3,000 yards. What Crimson Fox did not know was that the intermediate mana pulse cannon's range was actually 20,000 yards. However, although the cannons could cover so much distance, the beams were straight-line attacks. Hence, the height of these cannons' location would determine their actual range. From the top of Stone Forest Town's magic tower, they could cover around 3,000 yards. Meanwhile, the hill Shifeng had chosen was far taller than his magic tower, increasing the cannon's range significantly. Guild Leader, what should we do? Lonely Castle could not help but shudder when he learned that Zero Wing was responsible for the attack. With that kind of range and destructive power, the intermediate mana pulse cannons were a guild town's nightmare. If they allowed Zero Wing to fire those weapons a few more times, Green Rain Town would fall. Kill them. Send everyone to slaughter Zero Wing's members. Do not let Zero Wing fire those cannons again. Crimson Fox shouted, paling with anger. Regret tore at his heart. Had he known that Zero Wing possessed such frightening tools of destruction, he would never have let things go this far. With such weapons, destroying a town would be a piece of cake for Zero Wing. Understood. Lonely Castle immediately organized Crimson Castle's forces to set out towards Zero Wing's position. When the other upper echelons saw the two craters that defiled Green Rain Town and thought about Zero Wing directing those weapons towards their own towns, they shuddered with fear. This Guild Leader Fox, something urgent has come up in our guild that requires our immediate attention. I'm afraid we must go. Guild Leader Fox, our guild leader has found a rare boss and is in need of manpower. Since you have things under control here, we'll be taking our leave. Immediately, the 4 second-rate guild's upper echelons took out return scrolls and fled. A moment later, all of the allied guild's members vanished from Green Rain Town, leaving only Crimson Castle's members and a bunch of confused independent players. Crimson Fox nearly had a stroke as he watched the crowd disappear. Hadn't they declared that he wouldn't have to take action himself? Chapter 1431, Aqua Rose takes action. Chapter 1431, Aqua Rose takes action. When the intermediate mana pulse cannons had struck Green Rain Town, the resulting devastation hadn't only shocked the various second-rate guilds members. The spectating players retrieved their own return scrolls to flee the town as well. Everyone was afraid that the intermediate mana pulse cannons would strike again. They might not be so lucky in the next assault. None of them were willing to throw their lives away just to watch a battle. Active the Guild War Order. Seal off that hill. I don't want to see any of Zero Wing's members leave this place alive. Crimson Fox lost his composure as he glared at the distant hilltop. In the next moment, Crimson Castle locked down Green Rain Town's map. Return scrolls were rendered ineffective, and players were forced to rely on other means to escape. Once Crimson Fox had issued his orders, he led an army of 10,000 players in a charge towards their enemy. This was his only option left. If he continued to do nothing, he would be slaughtered. With the intermediate mana pulse cannon's power, Green Rain Town would only last a few more hits, yet the town's defense turrets couldn't reach Zero Wing. He had no choice but to lead his own forces to stop Zero Wing. However, the Shadow Dragon Legion had reacted long before Crimson Fox. Shortly after the intermediate mana pulse cannons had attacked, Shadowtooth had led the Shadow Dragon Legion in its own charge. Guild Leader, a team of 1,000 players are approaching. They're less than 1,000 yards away. They are very well equipped, and although they aren't wearing a guild emblem, they don't look like independent players. A ranger, Negative Life, reported as he used eagle eyes to scout. A strong 1,000-man team without a guild emblem? Could it be the Shadow Dragon Legion? Shifeng suddenly recalled Phoenix Rain's warning. The Shadow Dragon Legion might not be as strong as Nine Dragons Emperor's War Dragon Legion, but it was far more famous. The Dragon Phoenix Pavilion had once dispatched the Shadow Dragon Legion to capture an intermediate city under a top-tier, first-rate guild's control. Naturally, said guild had the support of powerful corporations and plenty of powerful experts. Although it hadn't been a super first-rate guild, it had been beyond ordinary first-rate guilds' reach. Yet, the Shadow Dragon Legion had single-handedly captured the intermediate town. Cities and towns were different. Both basic and advanced towns lacked defenses, but as soon as they became cities, their defenses would undergo a qualitative transformation. With a core magic array, not only could guilds suppress their enemies, but they could also enhance their own forces. The core magic array's buff was even more powerful than the magic towers. Moreover, the various large guilds generally put everything into their city's development. The defensive structures one could build in an intermediate city were far beyond that of a town. A guild could construct hundreds of defense turrets in its city, as well as all sorts of advanced defensive structures. Furthermore, well-funded, first-rate guilds generally protected their intermediate cities with powerful magic arrays. It would take several shots from an advanced mana pulse cannon to break such a barrier. If the magic array had adequate energy, it might even be beyond an advanced mana pulse cannon's power. Yet, the Shadow Dragon Legion had captured the intermediate city. News of the successful siege had shocked the various large guilds. During that time, only a few of God's domain's first-rate guilds had intermediate cities, while most guild cities were basic rank. As a result, the various first-rate guilds had been terrified of the Shadow Dragon Legion. The Shadow Dragon Legion? Isn't that one of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's trump card legions? Gentle Snow asked curiously when she heard Shifeng's comment. Nine Dragons Emperor has been secretly using Green Rain Town as a resource warehouse, so he has probably stationed the force there to protect the town, Shifeng explained. Guild leader, I don't think it'll be easy to take on the Shadow Dragon Legion and Crimson Castle's forces at the same time. Shadowtooth, the Shadow Dragon Legion's commander, is the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's #1 assassin. Based on our information on him, he has a top-tier epic short sword called Magic Breaker. It can cut through magic barriers like a hot knife through butter. Our magic array isn't likely to hold the Legion back, Gentle Snow said worriedly. They had considered the possibility of Crimson Castle's forces charging to meet them, but as long as they had enough magic crystals, their movement-type defensive magic array shouldn't have any issues holding back Tier 4 attacks. Unfortunately, it was a different story if Shadowtooth's Magic Breaker got involved. Without the defensive magic array's protection, they wouldn't survive an army of tens of thousands of elite players. Guild leader, leave Shadowtooth to me, Aqua Rose suddenly suggested. As long as I take him down, we can proceed with activating the defensive magic array. But, although Gentle Snow tried to argue, Shifeng beat her to it, saying, All right, I'll leave him to you. Send everyone else to stop the Shadow Dragon Legion's advance. Don't let anyone near the cannons. The intermediate mana pulse cannons might be powerful, but they had obvious weaknesses. First, they could be moved freely. Second, like all war weapons, their defense was paper-thin. Even a Tier 0 player could easily destroy them. Hence, the various large guilds usually avoided using war weapons offensively. Guild leader this. Shifeng's decision astonished Gentle Snow. Shadowtooth was an old monster with many years of fame. Even Nine Dragons Emperor treated the man with respect. His title as the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's #1 assassin wasn't just for show either. Even a peak expert like Yen Tianxing would struggle to survive a handful of moves against Shadowtooth. Yet, Shifeng had just sent Aqua Rose to deal with the assassin alone. She'd be lucky to survive, much less kill the man. They'd only have a small possibility of defeating Shadowtooth if she, Aqua Rose, and Zhao Yueru worked together. Relax. If Shadowtooth reveals himself, leave him to Aqua. You all should focus on the Shadow Dragon Legion's other experts. At the end of the day, that is still one of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's trump card legions. The Force has plenty of refinement realm experts. Even with our berserk skills, we don't have much of an advantage, Shifeng said, chuckling. Not only was Aqua Rose a Tier 2 player now, but she also had the Sea God's legacy. Since she had offered to take on Shadowtooth, she was confident in defeating him. If her victory weren't possible, it wouldn't be too late to send Gentle Snow and Zhao Yueru as reinforcements. Suddenly, Negative Life announced, Guild leader, Crimson Castle has sent an army of over 10,000 players. The Shadow Dragon Legion's members are also spreading out. By the looks of it, they plan to split into 4 groups. They sure reacted quickly. All right, let's fire a round at Crimson Castle's members first, Shifeng ordered when he noticed the intermediate mana pulse cannon's cooldown coming to an end. Aqua, Snow, Yueru, Negative, lead teams of 200 players and intercept the Shadow Dragon Legion. It's about time we teach this legion that Zero Wings shouldn't be provoked. Understood. Zero Wings members couldn't help their growing excitement. Fighting a trump card legion from a super first-rate guild would be far more fun than fighting a bunch of elite players. The Shadow Dragon Legion soon reached the foot of the hill after splitting into 4 groups. In the next moment, a black-clad man dashed ahead of the groups towards the magic barrier protecting the hill. Upon reaching his target, the man swung the dull gray short sword at the barrier. Puh. Instantly, he shattered the movement-type defensive magic array, the stored energy within dissipating. In addition, the magic array was forced into a 5-minute cooldown. The commander's magic breaker really is impressive. Zero Wings members must be stunned. Not only will they die here but will also claim their 2 war weapons. As the Shadow Dragon Legion members discussed the vanishing barrier, a mesmerizing beauty appeared on the opposite side. This woman stood alone on the path leading up the hill. She wielded a dark blue crystal staff and radiated an incredible aura. This woman was none other than Aqua Rose. Chapter 1432, Aqua Rose vs Shadowtooth. Chapter 1432, Aqua Rose vs Shadowtooth. Is she from Zero Wing? She dares to come alone? She must be tired of living in this world. The Shadow Dragon Legion members revealed wicked smiles when they saw Aqua Rose on the hillside path. There were over 200 players in their group, and any one of these players would be the strongest expert in a normal large guild. Yet Aqua Rose thought she could hold them off on her own. In their opinion, such an action was foolish and suicidal. We don't have time to waste. A few of you go and finish her off. Everyone else, get to the hilltop. We must get our hands on those war weapons. Shadowtooth shouted as he stared at Aqua Rose. Although she radiated an intense aura, a party from the Shadow Dragon Legion would be more than enough to deal with her. Understood. As soon as Shadowtooth issued his command, a 6-man party split away from the group and dashed towards Aqua Rose. This party consisted of an MT, 1 healer and 4 DPS. The level 45 shield warrior leading the party used charge at Aqua Rose. A moment after the shield warrior activated his skill, the berserker used charge as well. At the same time, the cleric cast a truth shield and minor recovery on the shield warrior, while 2 magical class experts and 1 ranger attacked Aqua Rose from a distance, aiming to cut off her path of retreat. In seconds, 3 different attack methods closed in on Aqua Rose. The 6 Shadow Dragon Legion members' coordination and timing were even beyond most expert parties. However, Aqua Rose showed no intentions of fleeing. Instead, she lightly tapped the butt of her stuff on the ground. Immediately, a wall of water rose up before her. The water wall continued to grow taller and soon an 8-meter-tall wave protected Aqua Rose. This tidal wave then surged to meet the approaching shield warrior and berserker. The tidal wave had enough range that it blocked the incoming ranged attacks from the enemy rear. It was the perfect combination of offense and defense. Meanwhile, the shield warrior and berserker were too close to the tidal wave's origin to dodge in time, and the massive wave devoured them both. After the tidal wave passed, the berserker, who had close to 40,000 HP, transformed into particles of white light and disappeared from the battlefield, a piece of equipment taking his place. As for the shield warrior, due to his quick reactions and activating shield wall in time, he survived Aqua Rose's attack. However, less than 1/3 of his HP remained. Moreover, this was after Truth Shield had absorbed part of the attack's damage. Just how high is her magic damage? The magical class players were astonished as they stared at the surviving shield warrior. It was obvious that the tidal wave had been the result of a channeled spell. Channeled spells were usually mini AoE attacks. With their magic damage, they'd be lucky to drop the shield warrior's HP by 1/3 with a tier 1 mini AoE spell. Of course, that was if he didn't activate Shield War and without Truth Shield's protection. You're still alive? Aqua Rose was slightly surprised to see the MT standing. It seems your magic resistance is quite high. She had used a tier 1 legacy spell called Water Wave. However, despite being only a tier 1 spell, the Sea Dragon Staff had enhanced her attack's power significantly. Overall, it should have rivaled a tier 1 large-scale destruction spell. Her magic damage is too high. Switch to range attacks. The surviving shield warrior shouted as he gave Aqua Rose a cautious look. The other party members nodded in agreement. Against magical class players with high magic damage, a shield warrior with limited mobility was a sitting duck. Defeating such a target would be a piece of cake. However, before the shield warrior could regret his hasty charge, thorny, pitch-black vines bound his feet. And before anyone had realized it, Aqua Rose had finished chanting another incantation as the surrounding mana surged towards the Sea Dragon's staff. Tier 2 spell Rising Flow. Aqua Rose waved her staff at the shield warrior and magical class players before her. Over a dozen jets of water streaked away from her, dancing and intertwining across 50 yards. It was beautiful. These jets' speed could even rival that of Shurfang swords. Even the shield warrior, who had kept his guard up against Aqua Rose's attacks, only managed to block 3 jets of water before 5 others struck. The magical class players, the ranger, and the cleric didn't have time to attack since they had assumed the shield warrior had been the woman's only target. By the time they reacted, it was too late. Even the cleric, who had only been struck once, had died instantly. With a single move, Aqua Rose had killed 5 experts from the Shadow Dragon Legion. Impossible. The Shadow Dragon Legion members that had planned to circle Aqua Rose to get up the hill were stupefied. After the brief exchange, a party from the Shadow Dragon Legion had been defeated. Aqua Rose had taken less time than a peak expert to eliminate one of the Shadow Dragon Legion's parties. Her spells were terrifying. Not only were they extremely fast but they also contained horrific power. The cleric had lost all of his 30,000 plus HP to a single water jet. However, Aqua Rose didn't seem particularly surprised. Even if a non-MT player successfully blocked one of her water jets, they'd be either dead or close to it. Rising Flow was a Tier 2 spell, but with the Sea Dragon Staff's buff, it had the power of a Tier 3 spell. So, Zero Wing had another expert of this caliber? Shadowtooth glared at Aqua Rose. A moment later, he revealed a playful smile as he muttered, "It's no wonder why she dared to block our path by herself. I guess I can play with you for a bit." The hillside path was very narrow, making it easily defensible. And with such powerful spells, they'd be little more than moving targets for the woman if they charged up the path. If they took an alternative route, climbing the hill's steep slopes, they'd still be targets. Only, rather than Aqua Rose, the entirety of Zero Wing's forces would use them as target practice. Hence, if they wanted to ascend this hill, they had to defeat Aqua Rose. Suddenly, Shadowtooth vanished. He then began to approach the woman. Although Shadowtooth didn't have Yen Tianxing's true orb, a domain realm expert like him knew his environment like the back of his hand. Not only could he move quickly, but he could also prevent others from noticing his presence. Only players with active observation or perception skills could catch a glimpse of him. However, whether or not the opponent discovered his presence didn't make a difference to an expert of Shadowtooth's caliber. He was simply too fast. He was extremely difficult to pin down with ranged attacks. Indeed, while Aqua Rose had detected the assassin, none of her spells found their target. It was as if Shadowtooth had grasped her spell's trajectory long before she had launched them, always moving out of their paths. Sure enough, the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's #1 assassin is truly powerful. Although Aqua Rose was double speed casting, she couldn't hinder Shadowtooth's approach. Despite predicting the assassin's movements thanks to her enhanced physique, Shadowtooth predicted hers as well. As a result, she could only watch as the enemy assassin closed in on her. Aqua Rose hadn't expected to encounter such a situation so soon after obtaining the Sea God's legacy. She controlled over a dozen projectile attacks, yet she couldn't hit her target. If she allowed Shadowtooth to come within melee range, she was dead meat. When Shadowtooth was only 20 yards away, he used Shadow Steps and appeared behind Aqua Rose. His magic breaker left an arc of gray light as it descended on the Cursemancer. Suddenly Aqua Rose shouted, "Bloom! Aqua Precinct!" Chapter 1433, Overwhelming Power. Chapter 1433, Overwhelming Power. Just before Shadowtooth's magic breaker bit into Aqua Rose's back, layers of water began to peel away from the woman like a blooming lotus flower. When Magic Breaker encountered the flower petals, not only did its advanced halt, but it also bounced off. She blocked it? Shadowtooth was slightly surprised to see the water curtain before him. Magic Breaker was designed to do just that, destroy magic barriers. It also weakened spells by 50%. Even an elementalist's strongest Tier 1 defensive spell, Frost Barrier, would only last one hit against his weapon. Yet, when he slashed at the thin layer of water, it felt as if he had hit rubber. He couldn't pierce the water curtain no matter how hard he tried. With Aqua Rose in the center, the spell formed a pool of water with a 70-yard radius. Although the water was only knee-deep, Shadowtooth could feel it restricting his movements. Although he struggled, he couldn't adapt to the watery environment. It was as if the pool rejected his existence. Not only did his basic attributes immediately decrease by 30%, but his physique also visibly weakened. This move was none other than Aqua Precinct, a Tier 2 legacy domain spell Aqua Rose had learned. However, since she was using the spell on land, it couldn't display its full potential. Even so, the spell would reduce all enemies' basic attributes by 30%, physique by 20%, and movement speed by 30%. However, the truly impressive effect wasn't its ability to weaken enemies. Rather, it was perfectly suited to both offense and defense. Unlike Ice Wall or Frost Barrier, which required incantations, Aqua Rose could easily form a maximum of 3 water curtains to protect herself with just a thought. Each water curtain had the properties of a Tier 2 defensive spell. With all 3 layers, the water curtains could even block Tier 3 spells. Aqua Precinct's offensive capabilities were even more impressive. Although the attacks weren't AoEs, Aqua Rose could control a maximum of 12 water snakes to strike her opponents. Each water snake's strength was the equivalent of 140% of the caster's intelligence. Let's take this fight seriously. Standing on the water's surface, Aqua Rose smiled at Shadowtooth. As she spoke, 12 8-meter-long water snakes manifested around the caster. From afar, it looked as if Shadowtooth were facing 12 great lords. Aqua Rose's intelligence attribute had already been extremely high, but after obtaining the Sea God's Legacy and the Sea Dragon Staff, each of her water snakes possessed strength on par with a great lord of the same level. Moreover, unlike a great lord, the water snakes didn't have HP. As long as Aqua Rose was alive and her Aqua Precinct was in place, they would fight. If this were a naval battle, the 12 water snakes would have double the strength. Even a Tier 2 player with an active Berserk skill would struggle to defeat one. Impossible? What kind of spell is that? Just who is she? The watching Shadow Dragon Legion members were stupefied. The sight of these 12 serpents was petrifying. How was this a PvP fight? Shadowtooth was practically trying to solo a boss. Die. Aqua Rose showed no mercy as she controlled the 12 snakes to strike at Shadowtooth. As the water snakes flew towards him, Shadowtooth felt as if he were watching a massive waterfall pour down on his head. Immediately, Shadowtooth activated his Berserk skill and tried to avoid the approaching attacks. However, the water snakes were astonishingly fast. They crossed a dozen yards and reached the assassin almost instantly. As a domain realm expert, Shadowtooth had a perfect grasp of the snake's trajectories, but he wasn't fast enough to move out of harm's way in time. In the end, one of the snakes slipped past his defenses. Fortunately, Shadowtooth reacted quickly enough to block the attack with Magic Breaker. Due to Magic Breaker's passive, spell-weakening effect, the water snake's attack wasn't nearly as powerful. In the end, its attack was slightly weaker than a High Lord's of the same level. Although Shadowtooth's basic attributes had diminished, his strength after activating his Berserk skill could still rival that of a Lord-ranked monster of the same level. He didn't have much of an issue blocking the attack. Though the impact had slid him backward, he had only lost around 400 HP. It wasn't a considerable amount to an assassin with 44,000 HP in total. For a time, the two combatants engaged in a battle of attrition. Aqua Precinct was unlike other spells, where one only needed to invest mana when they cast the spell. Rather, the domain spell fed off of the user's mana to sustain itself. In exchange, the spell did not have a cooldown or duration. Players could turn it on and off freely. That wasn't to say that Aqua Rose could maintain the Aqua Precinct indefinitely or a long time. The spell consumed a frightening amount of mana every second. Based on her remaining mana, Aqua Rose had about 3 more minutes with the spell. Of course, she could drink an advanced mana recovery potion to restore her mana during the battle. Shadowtooth was in a similar situation. Although he continued to lose HP throughout the battle, each attack only devoured 300 or 400 HP. He could easily replenish the lost HP with an advanced regeneration potion. As a result, the battle was locked in a temporary stalemate. I didn't expect to find an expert like you in Zero Wing as well. No wonder that little girl is trying to recruit your guild. Shadowtooth constantly tried to close in on his opponent. While the battle raged between Aqua Rose and Shadowtooth, the fight stunned Zero Wing's members atop the hill. In their eyes, both players were absolute monsters. If any one of them had to face Aqua Rose or Shadowtooth, they'd likely die in an instant. Sure enough, a domain realm expert isn't easy to deal with. Shadowtooth's prowess even surprised Shurfeng. Aqua Rose was a Tier 2 player and wielded the Sea God's Legacy, yet the assassin bridged the gap between their levels, tiers, and classes with his techniques. Aqua Rose only had a minor advantage. However, Aqua should have exhausted a lot of mana by now. It's about time she took things seriously. Unfortunately for Shadowtooth, while techniques could supplement for one's flaws, there was a limit to how much they could help. Not even domain realm experts were an exception. Take things seriously? The Vice Guild leader isn't fighting with everything she's got? Fierce Snake was confused when he overheard Shurfeng's muttering. He had only ever witnessed a fight of this level when Zhao Yueru had faced Yan Tianqing. In fact, Shadowtooth was much stronger than Yan Tianqing. The fact that Aqua Rose, who didn't have a cataclysmic spell like Zhao Yueru's Frost Flame Oblivion, could suppress a monster like Shadowtooth was astounding. Yet, Shurfeng had indicated that she wasn't using her full strength. Even if he heard it from Shurfeng, Fierce Snake found it hard to believe. As Fierce Snake struggled over the revelation, Aqua Rose took a deep breath. Suddenly, dark fog began to surround her body. The intensity of her aura skyrocketed. Could it be? She hasn't activated a berserk skill? Shadowtooth's expression darkened when he sensed Aqua Rose's rampaging aura. During Shadowtooth's brief moment of surprise, a water snake managed to slip his notice. By the time Shadowtooth snapped out of it, he had no choice but to block the attack with Magic Breaker. Boom. The impact threw the assassin over a dozen yards away, his HP decreasing by over 4,600. The water snake's attack power had exceeded the limit he could block. In God's domain, players could reduce incoming damage by blocking the attack, but when the opponent's strength was significantly higher than one's, it could break through one's block threshold. If that happened, players would receive a considerable amount of damage despite their defense. Chapter 1434, Power of a Tier 2 Class. Chapter 1434, Power of a Tier 2 Class. After the water snake had sent him flying, Shadowtooth had been forced to take 6 steps back when he landed, even after readjusting his posture in the air. His magic breaker hummed as it vibrated. From that one attack, Shadowtooth had lost over 10% of his HP on the spot. The snake's strength had clearly increased. Commander. How is she suddenly so strong? Has she been hiding her strength? The Shadow Dragon Legion members were shocked as they watched Aqua Rose approach Shadowtooth. Despite having activated his berserk skill, Shadowtooth had failed to block an attack. If they told the other members from the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, they'd be called raving lunatics. Yet it had just happened. Is this the difference between tiers? Gentle Snow was slightly surprised to see Shadowtooth in such a miserable state. Although she had known that there was a fairly large gap between Tier 1 and 2, she had never imagined that the gap would be this large. With Tier 2 attributes and spells, in addition to a legacy that even surpassed peak legacies, Aqua Rose overwhelmed the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's #1 assassin, rendering the latter utterly powerless. However, Aqua Rose had no intention of giving Shadowtooth time to catch his breath. Immediately, she controlled the 12 water snakes to continue their assault. Shit. Seeing the incoming water snakes, Shadowtooth felt his scalp tingle. Previously he had been able to defend himself with Magic Breaker, but now he couldn't even block an attack. Dodging the snakes was also impossible. After another brief exchange, Shadowtooth lost over 9,000 HP to 2 more water snakes. Now he had less than 50% remaining. It would only take a few more hits to send him to the afterlife. Everyone charge. Shadowtooth gnashed his teeth and issued the command. He turned to a slim assassin in dark gray leather armor and shouted, "Speeches, find a way to silence her." At this point he knew that he was no match for Aqua Rose. But this wasn't a competition, it was a real battle. He couldn't order a retreat just because he couldn't defeat the woman. Since one player wasn't enough to deal with Aqua Rose, they needed to fight as a unit. When Shadowtooth ordered the attack, the Shadow Dragon Legion members were shocked. Although this was not the first time their commander had asked for help dealing with a lone opponent, he generally only did so when they faced monster-level existences. This was the first time he has requested assistance against an unknown expert. In other words, Shadowtooth had acknowledged Aqua Rose's strength. While the Shadow Dragon Legion members were shocked, they still joined the fight without hesitation. The healers in the back immediately responded by casting Truth Shield on their commander. They sent a couple of healing spells at the same time, raising Shadowtooth's HP to full. Meanwhile, over a dozen assassins snuck around to Aqua Rose's back. The remaining ranged classes began to launch their attacks. Although the hillside path was narrow, there was enough room for dozens of ranged players to move within range while maintaining some distance from the Cursemancer. You're finally sick of watching? Rather than panic as dozens of spells and arrows rained down on her, Aqua Rose revealed a calm smile as she said, "Unfortunately, you are too late." Before anyone knew it, Aqua Rose had finished drawing several dozen lines of runes in the air. She then stabbed her staff into the ground and twisted it. Responding to her command, a massive magic array covered the ground, covering a 100-yard radius. During her fight with Shadowtooth, she had subtly moved closer to the other Shadow Dragon Legion members. However, she hadn't expected Shadowtooth to help her out, calling his allies to join him within her attack range. After gaining the Sea God's legacy, she had learned 3 Tier 2 spells. The strongest among them was Aqua Precinct. Aside from that, she had the Tier 2 curse, Annihilation Torrent. With the Sea Dragon Staff's buff, Annihilation Torrent could rival a Tier 3 large-scale destruction spell. Crap. Everyone retreat. Shadowtooth had a bad feeling when he saw the magic array under his feet. Unfortunately, it was too late. Suddenly, a torrent of water descended from the sky. Not only did the waterfall shatter all of the attacks against Aqua Rose, but it also formed a massive tidal wave once it crashed to the ground. The tidal wave spread out in a ring, devouring everything in range. In the blink of an eye, the wave swallowed Shadowtooth and his allies. Although some players had reacted quickly enough to activate invulnerability skills, Annihilation Torrent lasted for 10 seconds. Not even those skills could save them. After 10 seconds, none of the 200-plus Shadow Dragon Legion members were anywhere to be seen. Instead, weapons and pieces of equipment, which could even tempt top-tier experts, had taken their place. Is the Vice Guild leader also a monster? The Zero Wing members watching from the hilltops stared in shock as they watched Aqua Rose wipe out a quarter of the Shadow Dragon Legion by herself. Originally, they thought that Zhao Yueru was the strongest trump card Zero Wing had hidden. They hadn't expected Aqua Rose's power. Not only had she killed over 200 of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's experts, but she had also claimed the life of its #1 assassin. With such an impressive battle record, she could easily rank among the top 100 of the God's Domain experts list. While these players cheered for their Vice Guild leader, a figure suddenly appeared in the devastation her Annihilation Torrent had left. This figure was none other than the Shadow Dragon Legion's commander, Shadowtooth. What? He's still alive. Everyone was astonished to see the man. They had all seen Aqua Rose's large-scale destruction spell hit Shadowtooth, and they had watched the attack take his life, yet he stood before them. I never expected to find an expert like you in Zero Wing. I give up. The Shadow Dragon Legion will withdraw. However, you won't be so lucky next time, Shadowtooth declared as he glanced at Aqua Rose. Immediately he activated Vanish and disappeared. Aqua Rose's Annihilation Torrent had in fact killed him. However, he carried a super rare resuscitation scroll, a treasure he had obtained in an ancient ruin. The scroll would automatically revive a player and restore their HP to full upon death. The scroll also spared the player from the typical death penalty. He had hoped to save the scroll for the contest on Thunder Island. He had never thought that he would have to waste it in a place like this. He only had a total of 3 resuscitation scrolls. Among them, he had given one to 9 Dragons Emperor. Now that he had used one here, he only had one left. He couldn't afford to continue this battle with Aqua Rose. After all, the resuscitation scroll activated passively. It would activate as soon as the player carrying it died. It would not care about the player's desires. If she killed him a second time, he would lose this life-saving trump card. Shortly after Shadowtooth fled, the rest of the Shadow Dragon Legion followed. It was obvious that they had given up on this siege. When Crimson Fox and his army, who had just reached the battlefield, saw the Shadow Dragon Legion's retreat, confusion flashed in their eyes. What was happening? Chapter 1435, Slaughter. Chapter 1435, Slaughter. Why is the Shadow Dragon Legion retreating? Look, the Shadow Dragon Legion is missing a lot of members. What? The Shadow Dragon Legion actually lost to Zero Wing? Crimson Castle's members were stupefied as they watched the fleeing Shadow Dragon Legion. After all was said and done, the Shadow Dragon Legion was one of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's trump card legions. Although it only had 1,000 members, even a 10,000-man army from a first-rate guild would be powerless against the legion. Particularly in narrow terrain such as this, a 1,000-man legion could exert its strength to its full potential. Yet, Zero Wing's 1,000-plus army had defeated this legion. Guild leader, the Shadow Dragon Legion has retreated. What should we do? An indescribable sense of shock gripped Lonely Castle's heart. Useless garbage. Didn't they tell us to leave everything to them? Crimson Fox ground his teeth as he glared at the distant Shadow Dragon Legion. Since we can't rely on the Shadow Dragon Legion, we'll deal with this problem ourselves. I refuse to believe that Zero Wing can take on an army of 10,000 elites. There were always rumors in the virtual gaming world about superpowers trump card legions of 1,000 men slaughtering 10,000 men armies from first-rate guilds. But they were just that, rumors. When it really came down to a fight, the victor was never guaranteed until the end. Advance. Surround the hill. Do not let a single Zero Wing player leave this place alive. Crimson Fox commanded. Immediately, all 15,000-plus Crimson Castle elites surged towards Zero Wing's hill. However, when Crimson Castle's army was only 1,000 yards away from the hill, 2 beams of light descended from above. Before these players could react, the black and white beams slammed into Crimson Castle's army, following which 2 pillars of light rose into the sky. Even Green Rain Town's players could see the spectacle. When the 2 light pillars faded, they revealed 2 large empty clearings in the middle of the army. Despite the fact that Crimson Castle's members had spread out, the 2 attacks had claimed over 6,000 lives. Although these 2 shots had cost Shifeng 4,000 magic crystals, he considered the exchange worthwhile since he had killed so many players. Zero Wing. Crimson Fox's eyes turned bloodshot when he realized how many of his guild members had vanished. However, although Crimson Fox was furious, his companions didn't share the same sentiment. Rather than rage, fear flashed in these players' eyes. With just 2 shots, Zero Wing had annihilated 1/3 of their forces. If Zero Wing fired the cannons a few more times, their army would be devastated. Elsewhere, when the Shadow Dragon Legion saw the fading light pillars, they were relieved to escape the attacks. If not for their commander ordering the retreat when he had, the intermediate mana pulse cannons would have claimed their lives. They finally understood how pointless it was for a guild to focus on quantity over quality. Collecting war weapons was far more important. "Commander, are we really abandoning Green Rain Town?" a Shadow Dragon Legion member asked Shadowtooth. 9 Dragons Emperor had personally tasked them with Green Rain Town's protection. If they packed up and left now, they would most likely have to face the man's wrath. "What else are we supposed to do? Fight them?" Angrily, Shadowtooth snapped, "The only person to blame here is that fool Crimson Fox. If he hadn't resorted to petty tricks to stop Zero Wing from capturing Hidden Fog Town, Zero Wing wouldn't have decided to make an example of Crimson Castle. Zero Wing isn't what it was in the past. Notify the other guilds under our control. Tell them that unless they have a way to deal with those cannons, they should keep their heads down." He hadn't wanted to interfere with the arrangement between Zero Wing and Crimson Castle in the first place, but since the guild had come knocking on Green Rain Town's door, it had forced his hand. In the end, not only had he failed to stop Zero Wing, but he also lost over 300 Shadow Dragon Legion members in a few minutes. It had been a heavy blow to the Legion. "What are you all afraid of? These kinds of attacks have a long cooldown. Zero Wing only has 1,000 players. If we finish them off quickly enough, they won't have a chance to fire those cannons again," Crimson Fox bellowed. Although the intermediate mana pulse cannons were powerful, he had a rough estimate of their cooldown. 4 minutes and 30 seconds had passed between the first attack and the second. In other words, the intermediate mana pulse cannon's cooldown should be 4 to 5 minutes long. This was more than enough time for a 10,000-man army to wipe out 1,000 players. Crimson Fox's reasoning shook his players from their frightened daze. Reclaiming their confidence, they dashed for the hillside paths. "Guild leader, they're advancing again," Negative Life reported through the team chat. "Good. Everyone maintain your positions. Hold the enemy off for as long as possible." Crimson Fox's determination didn't particularly surprise Shifeng. The man had no more paths of retreat. If he let Zero Wing attack unhindered, he'd lose Green Rain Town and his army. The guild leader had to fight. However, climbing the hill wasn't so simple. Zero Wing's main force and Dark God's Legion members were stationed around the hillside paths. With the terrain, they had the advantage. As for trading the established paths for the steep slopes, doing so was suicide. This was also Zero Wing's main reason for choosing this hill. Otherwise, he would have chosen a farther location. After all, the intermediate mana pulse cannons had a maximum range of 20,000 yards. With Aqua Rose and the others guarding the 4 available hillside paths, the hill was like an impenetrable fortress. The path Zhao Yueru's team guarded was especially atrocious. With MTs at the forefront, Zhao Yueru could attack freely. Even when Crimson Castle's MTs activated their life-saving skills, receiving all sorts of damage absorption buffs, the Flame Witch's powerful fire-type spells killed them instantly, giving Crimson Castle's healers no time to help their companions. With each volley, Zhao Yueru claimed 2 or 3 dozen lives. All Crimson Castle's members could do at this point was trade blow for blow. However, both Zero Wing's main force and the Dark God's Legion had consumed Sea God's blessings, increasing all of their resistances by 100 points. With their inherent defense and magic resistance, they didn't even lose more than 4,000 HP from a direct hit. Furthermore, the MTs blocked the majority of the incoming attacks with their shields. The blocked attacks were lucky to deal over -100 damage to Zero Wing's MTs. Meanwhile, Gentle Snow fought like a literal war goddess as she faced Crimson Castle's members. After receiving a truth shield from one of the clerics in the rear, she dashed into the group of MTs on her path and started a massacre. With Whirlwind Slash she sent over a dozen MTs flying. Although Crimson Castle's ranged players tried to bombard the Snow Goddess, she dodged the majority of their attacks. Even if she failed to dodge an attack, none of them dealt more than -2,000 damage thanks to her 7 Luminaries battle army and the Sea God's blessing. After activating 7 Luminaries' domain, she was even more of a juggernaut. Aqua Rose's path was a simpler scene. The 12 water snakes she summoned with Aqua Precinct were practically invincible. No matter how many Crimson Castle members came at her, she sent them all flying. Her mana was the only problem, but the guild's oracles and druids easily solved the problem, supporting Aqua Rose by replenishing her mana. Including the advanced mana recovery potions, she should have no problems maintaining Aqua Precinct until the intermediate mana pulse cannon's cooldown completed. Time passed very quickly. After a few minutes, Crimson Castle had lost nearly 3,000 members, with 80% of the army's MTs dead. With most of its meat shields gone, Crimson Castle had to rely on their melee players to break Zero Wing's blockades. In contrast, Zero Wing had only suffered around 20 casualties thus far. It's about time we give Crimson Castle a taste of Zero Wing's true power. When Shifeng saw more reinforcements from Crimson Castle coming from Green Rain Town, he retrieved the Bible of Darkness and a large number of miniature ballistas. Chapter 1436, Everlasting Moment. Chapter 1436, Everlasting Moment. Charge. Keep moving forward. Their healers should be running out of mana. Once they run out, we'll take the hill. Crimson Fox shouted, his eyes bloodshot. At this point he had completely disregarded the potential losses. However, as Crimson Fox had said, Crimson Castle's ruthless charge was a huge burden on Zero Wing's healers. The healers relentlessly cast every healing spell they had available. Their mana consumption rate was even greater than during a boss raid. In a normal boss fight, they only needed to focus on the team's MTs. Now, however, they had to heal everyone. If they lost their focus, their companions could die. In fact, the 20+ casualties Zero Wing suffered so far were the result of something distracting the healers. Seeing Zero Wing's healers running low on mana, Crimson Castle's members grew even more fervent with their attacks. Zero Wing's members struggled. Fighting 10,000 pigs would be a challenge, not to mention 10,000 players with skills. If not for their superior combat techniques, weapons, and equipment, Crimson Castle's members would have already overrun the hill. Guild leader, although we have 20,000 more members on the way, are we really going to duke it out with Zero Wing? Lonely Castle asked. His heart ached as he watched his guildmates die in droves. These players were all elite members from the guild. Even if they defeated Zero Wing, Crimson Castle would likely suffer grievous losses. It would be utterly helpless if Zero Wing decided to attack again. We don't have a choice. If we lose Green Rain Town, Crimson Castle will be in an even worse position, Crimson Fox said as he looked towards the hilltop, helplessness gripping his heart. If he had known that Zero Wing was capable of this level of warfare, he would never have played such petty tricks. Unfortunately, it was too late for his regret. If Crimson Castle won this battle, although it would damage the guild's morale, it would still have a chance to make a comeback. In contrast, if Crimson Castle lost, the guild would forever lose its position in Lakeheart City. It wouldn't even be surprising if the guild disbanded as a result of losing Green Rain Town. He was certain that Zero Wing wouldn't last much longer. After all, their enemy had only dispatched a 1,000-man team. Zero Wing must be dreaming if it thought it could triumph over an elite army of tens of thousands with such a small force. However, as soon as Crimson Fox finished speaking, 2 more black-white beams of light descended from the hilltop. With the chaos of battle as a distraction, the 2 intermediate mana pulse cannons had finished their cooldowns before anyone had realized it. The 2 beams struck Crimson Castle's army once again. Although the attacks weren't as effective as last time, the 2 beams still erased nearly 3,000 Crimson Castle members. The rampaging survivors instantly fell silent. Compared to the cannon's physical destruction, the mental blow was devastating. Endure it. More reinforcements will arrive soon. Crimson Fox tried to placate his guild members. Once they're here, we'll prepare Zero Wing for its funeral. None of the drops from their members need to be reported or handed over to the guild. And I'll award any player who kills a Zero Wing member 1,000 GCPs. Killing an upper echelon will earn you 50,000 GCPs. Crimson Castle's members cheered when they heard the potential rewards. Although Crimson Castle's GCPs weren't particularly valuable, 1,000 points were still the equivalent of a little over 1 gold. 50,000 points were worth around 50 plus gold. It was enough money to purchase a common mount or a piece or two of top-tier equipment. However, following the intermediate mana pulse cannon's attacks, dozens of flaming arrows cascaded down from the hilltop. These were the exploding arrows from the miniature ballistas. Although the exploding arrows were much weaker than the intermediate mana pulse cannons, there were far more of them, and they had a shorter cooldown. To ensure the fall of Green Rain Town, Shifeng had prepared 50 miniature ballistas. Following which, explosions shook the ground amid Crimson Castle's army. The guild's members transformed into streaks of light. A single volley had claimed over 500 lives. As they watched their comrades die, the survivors also noticed a magic barrier spread out from the hilltop. The barrier blocked every attack from Crimson Castle's members, protecting Zero Wing. In contrast, Zero Wing's members easily attacked the players beyond the barrier. However, this wasn't the worst part. Without warning, a level 72 Tier 3 demon with fiery wings had appeared over Crimson Castle's army. Gathering mana in its palms, the demon created a fireball the size of a small mountain before hurling it at unsuspecting players. Instantly, over 100 players vanished. Impossible. Crimson Fox couldn't believe his eyes. How could Zero Wing be so strong? With such overwhelming offensive and defensive capabilities, not even a 100,000-man army could defeat Zero Wing's 1,000 players, much less his 10,000 players. The last attack had shocked Crimson Castle's members so badly that they had forgotten to continue their attacks. They all knew how powerful magic barriers were. As long as a magic barrier had enough mana and none of the attacks exceeded its endurance limit, it would remain in place indefinitely. Zero Wing dares to take the Shadow Dragon Legion so lightly. Watching from afar, fear and rage flashed in Shadowtooth's eyes. He had led one of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's bona fide trump card legions against the guild, yet Zero Wing hadn't even bothered to use everything it had during their fight. It felt as if their enemy had only been playing with them. It's about time we end this battle. Shifeng smiled when he saw Crimson Fox in the distance. He then activated Phantom Kill and Space Movement. He stepped into the spatial tear. In the blink of an eye, Shifeng appeared above Crimson Fox. The sky split. That's Black Flame. What is he trying to do? Crimson Castle's members were surprised to see the figure emerge from the spatial tear. They couldn't help but gasp when they got a clear view of the man. Black Flame. Although Shifeng's appearance surprised Crimson Fox, he reacted quickly and retrieved 2 Tier 3 magic scrolls from his bag. Sneering, he growled, "You dare stand before me? You must be trying to die." Over 15 yards separated the two guild leaders. Crimson Castle's top-tier experts surrounded them. He even had a Tier 3 defensive scroll and Tier 3 single-target attack scroll. Killing a peak expert should be a piece of cake. Die. Crimson Fox unfurled the Tier 3 single-target attack scroll. However, Shifeng responded immediately by using Instant Strike, appearing before his enemy and brandishing Killing Ray. Shadow Blade. Suddenly, a single streak of blue light, surrounded by 9 streaks of black light, shot through Crimson Fox, who still wore his sinister smile, and devoured all of the man's HP. Crimson Fox hadn't even activated the unfurled magic scroll. Everyone who saw Shifeng's attack speed gasped. As Crimson Fox collapsed to the ground, he dropped a pair of gloves and a stone fragment that emitted a faint pressure. Without hesitation, Shifeng pocketed both items. He then switched position with his doppelganger and cancelled Phantom Kill, disappearing as if he had never existed in the first place. Meanwhile, Crimson Castle's nearby experts stood there in a daze. It was as if time had frozen for these experts. Chapter 1437. Black Dragon Empire Shocked. Chapter 1437, Black Dragon Empire Shocked. This is a lie, right? He actually disappeared? Is he a ghost? Crimson Castle's members stared in shock at their guild leader's motionless body. Everything had happened too quickly. Shifeng had appeared and taken Crimson Fox's life before anyone had realized it. He then vanished without a trace. After Shifeng had left, these players were silent for a long moment. When they finally snapped out of their daze, their complexions turned deathly pale as they looked toward Shifeng, who had returned to the hilltop. Fear dominated Crimson Castle's members. They had stood over 1,000 yards away from the mountain to avoid getting caught in the shockwaves from the intermediate mana pulse cannon's attacks. Originally they had assumed that they were safe. However, Shifeng only needed a moment to teach them how foolish that hope was. If Shifeng could easily kill an expert like their guild leader despite over 1,000 yards between them, killing them all would be child's play. Today they finally learned what a real expert was. They could never use numbers to overwhelm this level of strength. Vice Guild Leader, do we continue the battle? The guild's experts turned to the shield warrior Lonely Castle. Now that Crimson Fox, their commander and guild leader, was dead, the army fell into disarray. They still hadn't destroyed Zero Wing's magic barrier, and a constant stream of exploding arrows still rained down. Even with 20,000 reinforcements, they would be marching to their deaths. We retreat, Lonely Castle said, shaking his head dejectedly as he stared at Shifeng, who stood at the top of the hill. The strength Zero Wing had displayed was simply mind-boggling, and with their guild leader dead, Lonely Castle wasn't confident of defeating the enemy guild. Hearing Lonely Castle's order to retreat, Crimson Castle's members breathed a sigh of relief. They abruptly scattered, fleeing the battlefield like madmen. When Crimson Castle's reinforcements caught wind of the order, they too fled into the surrounding wilderness, not daring to set foot in Green Rain Town again. The guild members in Green Rain Town began to evacuate, afraid that the intermediate mana pulse cannons would obliterate them if they weren't fast enough. Meanwhile, news of Zero Wing's victory spread throughout the Black Dragon Empire. Although guilds fought each other every day in the Empire, large-scale siege wars were rare. After all, no guild wanted to lose an advantage. These guilds avoided all-out wars unless absolutely necessary. Many of the Empire's players had been watching the battle between Zero Wing and Crimson Castle. Not even the latter's tens of thousands of elite members in Green Rain Town were a match for Zero Wing's 1,000-man team. No matter how they looked at it, the outcome was incomprehensible. Hence, news of the war had spread much quicker than usual. Did you hear? Crimson Castle was defeated. What's going on? Crimson Castle actually lost? Didn't Zero Wing only dispatch 1,000 players? That can't be possible, right? After all, Crimson Castle has an elite army of tens of thousands. They weren't a match for Zero Wing's 1,000-man team? Are Crimson Castle's members idiots? You guys might not realize it since you weren't there, but I watched the battle personally. Zero Wing had used some kind of war weapon to shatter the town's defensive magic array in a single hit and kill several thousand players instantly. The second-rate guilds that had allied with Crimson Castle pulled their forces from the town on the spot. Although Crimson Castle sent its army to meet its enemy, Zero Wing's war weapons wiped out one-third of its forces before Crimson Castle could even reach the guild. Zero Wing even used a fleet of miniature ballistas to bombard Crimson Castle's forces with flaming arrows. Against so many war weapons, not even several 100,000 elite players would have a chance, much less tens of thousands. The Black Dragon Empire's official forums burned with conversation. Some people had even uploaded battle videos of Zero Wing's assault on Green Rain Town. Everyone who saw the two massive craters in Green Rain Town was stupefied. At the same time, they also understood why Crimson Castle had lost. What a joke. With a few more attacks of that scale, Green Rain Town would fall to ruin. Crimson Castle hadn't had any hope of winning. In fact, that battle couldn't be called a fight. This had simply been one-sided bullying. The number of miniature ballistas Zero Wing had employed in the end had been particularly ridiculous. How was a player army supposed to stand against so many war weapons? Meanwhile, the recording of Crimson Fox's death at Shifeng's hands showed the Black Dragon Empire's players what a Sword King truly was. So, that is Zero Wing? Everyone's eyes glowed when they watched Zero Wing's overwhelming power. Although Zero Wing's performance in the ranking competition had been frightening, it had only proven that the guild had powerful experts. To the Black Dragon Empire's players, Zero Wing had a long way to go before it could compare to the other large guilds' foundations. However, after watching today's battle, everyone believed that Zero Wing deserved the rank it won in the competition. With so many weapons of war, who would possibly dare provoke the guild? For a time after the momentous battle, more of the Empire's players tried to join Zero Wing. Now that they were certain of Zero Wing's rise in the Empire, they knew that it'd be far more difficult to join the guild if they didn't do so now. If they did not join now, it would become much more difficult to do so in the future. At the same time, the Empire's various large guilds held emergency meetings. The goal of these meetings was simple: notify everyone to avoid provoking Zero Wing under any circumstances. At the same time, they began to reorganize their priorities, focusing on exploring ancient ruins to obtain more war weapons. Shi Feng had no idea that due to this war, he had taught these guilds an important lesson. The number of members a guild had would no longer be important in guild wars and siege battles. Defensive magic arrays and war weapons would decide victory. With these armaments, even a 1,000-man team could easily capture a guild town. Meanwhile, every player had fled Green Rain Town. Only the town's NPCs remained. Guild leader, are we going to take over Green Rain Town now? Gentle Snow's excitement grew when she saw the defenseless guild town. From the time they had arrived, the battle had only lasted a little over 10 minutes, and they had captured a guild town while only suffering minor losses. Moreover, Green Rain Town was in a resource-rich area. With this town, Zero Wing would have a much easier time collecting herbs and ores. No. We're going to destroy it, Shi Feng said, shaking his head. But guild leader, it's a ready-made town. If we claim it, we can save on construction costs, Aqua Rose hurriedly advised when she heard Shi Feng's plan. What a joke. It was clear that Crimson Castle must have invested at least several tens of thousands of gold. Moreover, Green Rain Town was a high-resource town. Many guilds would love such an opportunity. If not for Nine Dragons Emperor's secret support, the Empire's first-rate guilds would have long since tried to raid the town and claim it for their own. Yet Shi Feng wanted to abandon it. This was insane. There's no need to get caught up in this town. We have a much better option, Shi Feng said, smiling. He then took a blood-red stone that radiated a faint pressure from his bag. This was the stone that had dropped from Crimson Fox's body. Chapter 1438, Frightening Harvest. Chapter 1438, Frightening Harvest. A better option. Gentle Snow looked at the blood-red stone in Shi Feng's hand curiously. The stone was the size of a fist. If not for the faint pressure radiating from it, it would be easily mistaken for an ordinary red gemstone. This isn't just an ordinary stone. It's actually made of red luminary stone. Seeing the doubt on Gentle Snow's face, Shi Feng smiled and explained, "You know what red luminary stone is. It's far more valuable than magic crystals. It's also a superconductive or only second to the 7 luminaries crystals." But what does this stone have anything to do with a resource town? Gentle Snow asked curiously. I haven't finished. This stone is made of red luminaire stone, but it's not complete. Originally, the Black Dragon Empire had created teleportation gates leading to 33 neutral maps outside of the Empire's borders. These locations were the reason the Empire had flourished during the past. However, the teleportation gates had been destroyed during a rebellion, and the teleportation cores that powered the gates had gone missing. This stone is one of those cores. With this teleportation core, we can construct a stable teleportation gate in a guild town within the Black Dragon Empire as long as we collect a bottle of temporal sand and 200,000 magic crystals. We can use the teleportation gate to travel to the neutral map recorded within the core. Shi Feng explained the teleportation core in detail as he gazed at the stone in his hand. During the Black Dragon Empire's early days, the Empire had stood shoulder to shoulder with the 4 great empires. If not for the rebellion and the teleportation gate's destruction, the Black Dragon Empire would have been the 5th strongest empire in God's domain. The Dragon Phoenix Pavilion had obtained 7 of the 33 teleportation cores in the past. As a result, the pavilion had secured an abundance of resources and eventually grew to rival veteran super guilds. Shi Feng had never expected to obtain one of these cores by killing Crimson Fox. There were only 33 of these teleportation cores in the Black Dragon Empire, each one linked to high-resource neutral map. Due to the nature of these maps, teleportation arrays couldn't reach them. Players usually had to rely on their own 2 feet to travel to these areas. If one had a means to teleport to a particular map, they'd have a monopoly on the map's resources. Shi Feng had considered capturing Green Rain Town, but the town's resources paled in comparison to the teleportation core. As long as Zero Wing captured Hidden Fog Town and constructed a teleportation gate, it'd have access to a large amount of resources, focusing a fraction of those resources into the town's development. They didn't need Green Rain Town, it would just be an additional expenditure for the guild. They didn't need to worry about fending off other major powers contesting for the town either. Teleport to a neutral map? Guild leader, are you joking? Gentle Snow stared at the stone in Shi Feng's hand in shock. She had been playing God's domain for quite some time now. As a member of the guild's upper management, she kept up on various information about the game. Naturally, she had an acute understanding of the importance of neutral maps. Neutral maps were not under human control. They weren't suitable for human settlements either. However, these locations shared a similar aspect. They had a ridiculous amount of resources, far beyond those found in empires and kingdoms. One could find rare and valuable resources in practically every corner. However, neutral maps were extremely dangerous. They were also far from any civilization. Traveling to and from these areas was troublesome. Furthermore, it was difficult for players to remain in these maps for long periods. As a result, players' harvest was limited. A teleportation gate connected to a neutral map was as good as taking control of that map. One could send players through the gate freely. Not only was it convenient, but it would also help guild towns attract players and the resources they had to offer. One could just imagine how frighteningly valuable the core was. Not even 5 green rain toes would be worth as much as a single teleportation core. Once Zero Wing set up the teleportation gate, it could develop in the Black Dragon Empire without worry, even if it had to face fierce competition from the Empire's other large guilds. Take a look at it yourself. Shi Feng then shared the teleportation core's introductory text with Gentle Snow. The text referred to the stone as a teleportation core as Shi Feng had explained. However, there was no mention of its connected location. It only stated that it could be used to construct a teleportation gate leading to an unknown location. After reading the introductory text, Gentle Snow began to search through Zero Wing's database. She quickly found information regarding fallen teleportation gates that had existed within the Empire. These gates had led to 33 different neutral maps. This discovery rendered Gentle Snow speechless. She even wondered if Shi Feng were some kind of robot. It was astonishing how much information he knew. The information about the Black Dragon Empire's teleportation gates was fragmented. If not for Shi Feng's explanation, she wouldn't have learned anything about these gates. Although the teleportation core was a wonderful item, there was a major problem: the bottle of temporal sand and the 200,000 magic crystals. She had never even heard of the temporal sand. Without the temporal sand, the teleportation core was just a paperweight. Leave the teleportation gate to me. You just need to worry about securing Hidden Fog Town and completing your Tier 2 promotion as soon as possible. You've seen the gap between Tier 1 and 2 for yourself. The sooner you complete your promotion quest, the easier leveling up will be, Shi Feng said. He was fully aware of the teleportation core's flaws. The required 200,000 magic crystals were enough to choke a first-rate guild. It was already difficult to make ends meet, much less save up. A guild would require a tremendous amount of time to collect so many crystals. The other problem was the temporal sand. Temporal sand was counted by the grain, and each bottle contained 500 grains. Every grain was extremely valuable. Each had sold for 20 gold or more in the past. During its peak, these temporal sand grains had even sold for over 50 gold each. Moreover, there wasn't nearly enough supply to keep up with demand. Aside from its relation to the teleportation gates, temporal sand gains were also used as valuable materials in crafting various epic items. When one used temporal sand in an item's production, not only could it increase the success rate, but it could also enhance the item's attributes. Moreover, the more temporal sand the crafter used, the greater the final product's enhancements would be. Hence, temporal sand had been highly sought after in God's domain. However, he only knew of 2 methods to obtain temporal sand in the Black Dragon Empire. Fortunately, he was considerably familiar with one method. He could purchase them from Countess Katie Green in Lakeheart City. It seems like it's time to pay another visit. Chapter 1439, Revisiting the Countess's Mansion. Chapter 1439, Revisiting the Countess's Mansion. Black Dragon Empire, Black Dragon City. People crowded the streets in the city's prosperous trade area. Level 42 and 43 experts were everywhere. Players atop mounts were also a common sight. In the luxurious shops lining the streets, one could easily find level 40 secret silver weapons and equipment. A few shops even had level 40 dark gold weapons and equipment on display in their windows. Although more players in God's domain reached level 40 by the day, level 40 weapons and equipment were still extremely rare. Many players that had reached level 40 had to continue using level 35 equipment. Players who obtained even a piece of level 40 secret silver equipment were overjoyed. As for level 40 dark gold equipment, such items were even hard to find in Kingdom's auction houses. Hence, seeing level 40 dark gold equipment on display in the shops here was incredible. Only the level 40 dark gold weapons and equipment were ridiculously expensive. Their prices were at least 3 times higher than the market price. It was obvious that these shops had no intentions of selling the items, only using them for promotion. Meanwhile, an 8-story tall guild hall dominated the center of the trade area. From the building's top floor, a player could gaze upon the city as if they were its emperor. In the guild hall's top floor hall, Nine Dragons Emperor read a report he had just received from a subordinate. The players next to this intense player felt an intense pressure weigh on their shoulders. They felt as if they had been submerged in water as they even struggled to breathe. Zero Wing. Nine Dragons Emperor's eyes were icy as he read the report. Does Black Flame think he can afford my enmity just because he has Phoenix Rain backing him up? Not long ago, Zero Wing had utterly destroyed both of the towns under Crimson Castle's control. Although most players didn't know that he, in fact, controlled both of the towns from the shadows, the Black Dragon Empire's various large guilds were fully aware of the fact. Destroying these resource towns was the equivalent of a slap to the face. Yet, Nine Dragons Emperor couldn't do anything about it. Both towns had belonged to him personally, not his guild. If he tried to mobilize the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's power against Zero Wing, Phoenix Rain would certainly get in his way, but sending his personal forces against the offending guild was dangerous. Zero Wing was no longer a monster to be taken lightly. Without the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's foundations, neither the intermediate mana pulse cannons nor the movement-type defensive magic array would be easy to deal with. The guild had items that could cope with Zero Wing's war weapons, but they were under the Great Pavilion Master's control. Unless he became the next Great Pavilion Master, he wouldn't have access to these items. Marshal, tell Beast Emperor that I accept his offer, but I have one condition. He must help us destroy Zero Wing. Nine Dragons Emperor instructed his general in a frosty tone. Pavilion Master, if you agree to Beast Emperor's conditions, it will likely affect the situation at Black Dragon City. On the off chance that the Great Pavilion Master investigates the matter, Marshal Dragon could not help his surprise to hear the order. It doesn't matter. Beast Emperor needs some more time to deal with issues on his side. By the time he's ready, the contest on Thunder Island will be over. By then, I could be the Great Pavilion Master. Who could possibly stand in my way? Nine Dragons Emperor said, smiling confidently. All right, enough. Just pass my answer on to that old man. Understood. Marshal Dragon immediately left the hall. Meanwhile, a mysterious man in black robes and bandages was in the middle of a ceremony in a canyon surrounded by evil energy. As he led the ritual, the mana density around the man was several times higher than when Stone Forest Town's obelisk had activated. Flame Blood, whose skin had turned dark gray, suddenly approached the black-clad man. Temple Master, we just received a message from Nine Dragon Emperor's men. The Dragon Pavilion Master has agreed to our conditions. However, in return he wants us to eliminate Zero Wing, Flame Blood said with a smile. Ah, interesting. Truly interesting. Beast Emperor stopped chanting when he heard the news. He continued, I will gladly accept this condition. Tell Nine Dragons Emperor that as long as I complete my quest, neither Zero Wing nor his rival Phoenix Rain will be a problem. He already bore a deep-seated hatred for Zero Wing. Due to Black Flame, not only had his evil demon army suffered a massive loss, but he had also lost an evil god's apostle slot. If given the opportunity, he'd make the guild pay. Only he hadn't expected Zero Wing to infuriate Nine Dragons Emperor to such a degree. Despite his numerous attempts to ally with Nine Dragons Emperor, the man had refused his offers. The refusals put in him a bit of a predicament. Although he was an evil god's envoy, he hadn't accumulated enough power to be a threat to the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. He had never dreamed that Zero Wing would inevitably lend him a hand. With Heaven's Burial helping him in Starmoon Kingdom and Nine Dragons Emperor supporting him in the Black Dragon Empire, he now had over a 70% chance of completing the quest he had received from the Evil God's Temple's Great Temple Master. Meanwhile, Lakeheart City's main street was quite lively. It was no less active than Black Dragon City's trade area. This was all because Zero Wing had destroyed Crimson Castle's 2 guild towns. This thorough and spectacular victory proved Zero Wing's prowess to every player in the city. It was obvious that given enough time, Zero Wing's branch guild in the Black Dragon Empire would grow to stand on equal footing with, or even surpass, the Empire's first-rate guilds, becoming the second most powerful guild in the Black Dragon Empire. Many independent players and experts in the Empire had rushed to Lake Heart City in hopes of joining Zero Wing and its prosperous future. Even some of the Empire's well-known adventurer teams wanted to join the guild. Not only was the guild frighteningly powerful, but it also had the battle arena in Stone Forest Town. At this point, due to the ranking competition's results, Stone Forest Town's battle arena had become famous throughout the Black Dragon Empire. According to the statistics some players had compiled, the public had discovered that many of the Empire's top-ranking experts had trained in the battle arena. To be precise, they had trained in the advanced combat rooms. The advanced combat room was a sacred training grounds that all expert players dreamed of accessing. Among the players that had trained in the advanced combat rooms, Remnant Cloud and Graceful Moon had displayed the greatest improvements to their combat standards. During the previous ranking competition, Remnant Cloud had only risen to the top 100 of his class, yet he had ranked among the top 50 in the latest competition. Furthermore, this last ranking competition had included far more powerful experts than those in the past. Many of the previous top 100 experts didn't even make it into the top 200. Graceful Moon's performance had also been surprising, ranking among the top 100 of her class. Due to these two players' performances, Stone Forest Town's popularity in the Black Dragon Empire had skyrocketed despite Zero Wing's lack of effort to promote the town. As Shi Feng strolled down Lake Heart City's main street, he wore a new appearance thanks to the demon mask. With his Nightwalker's cape's concealment, not even high-tiered NPCs he had encountered before should be able to recognize him. During his previous visit to Countess Katie Green's mansion, the Countess had thrown him into a trial of God. Now that he had the Nightwalker cape, he should be able to visit the Countess again. As Shi Feng approached the Countess's mansion, the golden stigmata's pulsing grew more intense. It reached a peak when he finally stood before the building. She shouldn't be able to notice it, right? Taking a deep breath, Shi Feng stepped through the mansion's main entrance. Chapter 1440, Tier 5 Sacred Magic Night. Chapter 1440, Tier 5 Sacred Magic Night. Sir, this is the Countess's mansion. Outsiders are prohibited from entering. As soon as Shi Feng set foot in the compound, an elderly man in a black suit appeared before him. Outsiders are prohibited? Shi Feng was curious as he looked at the old man. Milton, Countess's steward, human. Level 140. HP 55, 000, 000/55, 000, Although this was a countess's mansion, Countess Katie Green was the proprietress of many of the Empire's black market shops. She often had business with many NPC merchants. Hence, she never restricted entry to her mansion. He hadn't encountered a single servant during his previous visit, yet entry was now restricted. It was clear that the Countess had grown cautious. If he did not deal with this situation properly, he might further agitate the Countess. She might even move her base of operations elsewhere. Fortunately, he had the Nightwalker's cape. The Countess wouldn't easily see through his disguise. Hello. I've heard that the Countess is interested in mana stones. I have quite a few on hand. May I know if I can speak with her ladyship? Shi Feng said as he revealed his Demon Hunter title. The Demon Hunter title granted him the authority of a world noble. As such, he enjoyed the status of a noble throughout all of God's domain's human territories. With this title, he could even gain access to a duke's home. So, you are Lord Demon Hunter. Please follow me. Milton immediately adopted a respectful attitude upon seeing Shi Feng's title. The old man then led Shi Feng into the mansion. In the past, Countess Katie Green had been quite famous in the Black Dragon Empire. There were two reasons for her renown. The first reason was Countess Katie Green's ownership of the black market in Black Dragon Empire's Abyss City. Abyss City was like Starmoon Kingdom's Evernight City in that it was also a dark city. Countess Katie Green's black market shop in the city offered players a variety of high-quality items, some of which could even tempt super guilds. However, it was not easy to purchase the items from this shop. To gain access, one first needed sufficient favorability with the Countess. Players would only be able to purchase items after becoming members of the shop. Meanwhile, the shop didn't accept coins or magic crystals as payment. Rather, one had to haggle and offer items of equal value. The second and most important reason for the Countess's fame in the Empire was related to her stock of temporal sand. Temporal sand was incredibly rare. Normally, players only had a chance of obtaining a few grains from super large-scale team dungeons. Depending on the dungeon's difficulty, the drop rate would vary. However, even normal mode super large-scale team dungeons were no walk in the park. These dungeons were generally reserved for large guilds and a small number of well-known and top adventurer teams. Due to its rarity and many uses, temporal sand was an extremely valuable commodity. Normally, the various large guilds reserved it as a strategic resource. Fortunately, one could purchase temporal sand from Countess Katie Green, but there was a limit of 100 grains per day. As for the exchange rate, a single grain of temporal sand cost 1 mana stone. This price was a testament to the grain's value. When players had realized this in the past, it had caused a commotion that had shaken God's domain. Eventually, though, the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion had monopolized this privilege. Since no one knew about temporal sand yet, this was a good opportunity for Shifeng to build up his stock. Luckily, he had accumulated quite a few mana stones thus far. As for the 7 treasures, he would cautiously investigate the matter. After all, as a countess in the Black Dragon Empire, her status was extraordinary. The countess was a more powerful individual than he was. Naturally, one couldn't just open a shop in Abyss City without enough strength. Countess Katie Green was capable of rivaling Weissman, White River City's magistrate. Her combat power was at the peak of Tier 4. A measly Tier 2 player like Shifeng had no chance against the woman. A short moment later, under Milton's lead, Shifeng arrived before a quiet, elegant indoor garden on the mansion's 3rd floor. A beautiful woman in a luxurious, crimson dress relaxed in the garden's center. She sipped from a teacup as she read an ancient tome. The woman gave off a peaceful aura. As the aura swept over him, Shifeng felt as if nature itself had embraced him. The feeling was intoxicating. Why is she so strong? Shifeng stared at Countess Katie Green in shock. He had met the Countess many times in his previous life. However, the Countess had always been a level 180 Tier 4 Sky Knight. Now, however, her statistics revealed that she was a level 180, Tier 5 Sacred Magic Knight. Although only one tier separated the two, the difference was like heaven and earth. If a Tier 4 NPC could dominate and protect a major NPC city, then a Tier 5 NPC could move through a kingdom's capital unhindered. A Tier 5 NPC was an absolute overlord. Normally, one only encountered such existences in imperial capitals. Encountering one in other major NPC cities would rely entirely on luck. Yet, this countess had become one such mythical powerhouse. When Shifeng thought about the 7 treasures fragment in this woman's hands, a hint of despair gripped his heart. Even if he became a level 180 Tier 5 player, he still couldn't defeat the countess, much less at level 57. NPCs and players were on different levels. NPCs had a far more difficult time reaching new tiers. When they succeeded, their strength would undergo a qualitative transformation. Moreover, the higher the tier they reached, the more strength they would acquire. Right now, well-equipped Tier 2 players might be capable of defeating an ordinary Tier 2 NPC of the same level. However, after reaching Tier 4, only peak experts and above could face Tier 4 NPCs. Moreover, a peak expert must be equipped with at least 1 or 2 fragmented legendary items to have a chance. Otherwise, fighting one-on-one with a Tier 4 NPC would be suicidal. Unlike players, NPCs had an easier time obtaining top-tier equipment. Players had to struggle for every piece of epic equipment they wore, but NPCs could get what they needed as long as they had enough money. Tier 5 NPCs typically wielded at least 1 legendary item. If a Tier 5 player didn't have the same, they could never stand against an NPC of the same tier. Hence, Tier 5 players had usually formed parties to deal with a Tier 5 NPC. "I hear that you have a lot of mana stones?" Katie Green asked softly as she set her book down and turned to Shifeng. "Yes, your ladyship." Shifeng nodded. At the same time, he celebrated the fact that he had obtained the Nightwalker's cape. Thanks to its effects, the Countess had failed to see through his disguise. She didn't seem to detect the golden stigmata's aura on him either. If he were discovered, the consequences would be unimaginable. "How many do you have?" Katie Green asked. "If you have enough, I am willing to offer a generous trade." Shifeng was slightly confused to hear Katie Green's interest. He hadn't expected her to want mana stones so fervently. She had never shown such interest in the past. Could my previous visit have caused this change in her? The only explanation Shifeng could think of was the revelation of his identity as the War God's Temple's representative during his previous visit. After giving the matter some thought, he stated, "I currently have 100 mana stones. Will that be enough?" He had prepared the 100 mana stones to purchase the temporal sand. He hadn't brought any extra with him. It seemed as if he had blundered. 100? Alright, what do you want for them? Katie Green nodded, clearly satisfied with the amount. If you don't know what items you're looking for, I can offer a few valuables for you to consider. Of course, I will only accept mana stones for these items. Saying so, Katie Green gestured with a hand. Suddenly, a stone table rose from the ground, covered in all sorts of dazzling items. Every item radiated a faint pressure. Chapter 1441, Treasure of Time. Chapter 1441, Treasure of Time. Shifeng was shocked when he saw the items on the table. In the past, the only item the Countess had offered for trade was the temporal sand, yet now she had offered over 10 items. Moreover, none of these items were any less valuable than the temporal sand. As expected of the proprietress of Abyss City's black market shop, she even has an item like this. Shifeng's gaze couldn't help but drift to a leaf of lambskin parchment. Although the temporal sand was very valuable, players could obtain it from other sources. However, encountering the lambskin parchment on the table depended on luck. This parchment was none other than the magic thruster design. The various large guild would go crazy over this item. The magic thruster was capable of increasing a ship's movement speed by 30%. To naval players, this item was a godsend. Unlike on land, there were far fewer teleportation points available out at sea. If players wished to travel to a particular island to level, they generally had to travel by boat. A 30% increase to movement speed would undoubtedly save players a lot of travel time. Moreover, there were many sea monsters in the ocean. If an ordinary boat encountered a boss-grade sea monster, escape was practically impossible. With the magic thruster, however, even an ordinary boat had a high chance of getting away safely. Players were even more likely to escape if they had an ordinary speedboat or better. Hence, magic thrusters were highly sought after. Even players with cheap ships would be desperate for one. The magic thruster's only drawback was that it was a consumable item. It would disappear after being used for a certain amount of time. Moreover, depending on how much mana it uses, the magic thruster's duration would differ. The smaller a ship was, the less mana it would cost to enhance its movement speed and vice versa. As an example, on an ordinary speedboat, the magic thruster could last for 48 hours. However, the magic thruster was not cheap. Even once the price had stabilized on the market, each thruster had sold for 1 gold, 50 silver in the past. It wasn't an item ordinary players could afford. Generally, only powerful adventurer teams and guilds had purchased the item to augment their high-quality ships. With the speed boost, they could travel to more dangerous locations and reap greater rewards. Shifeng had never thought that Countess Katie Green would willingly offer such a precious design for exchange. Only the price was slightly high. The Countess wanted 1,000 mana stones for the design. Even though Shifeng could synthesize mana stones with the Philosopher's Stone, it wasn't a cheap endeavor. Each mana stone required 50 magic crystals. In other words, that design would cost him 50,000 magic crystals. Although he had accumulated quite a sum recently, he had spent a lot of his crystals during the fight against Crimson Castle. After taking into account his personal expenditures, he only had enough magic crystals to purchase 2 designs. For a moment, Shifeng wasn't sure what to do. Magic crystals were invaluable to Zero Wing. Without them, its war weapons would be useless. If he spent all of the guild's reserves to purchase the magic thruster designs, he would regret the decision should the guild come under attack. All right. I have another item for sale. Seeing Shifeng's hesitation, Katie Green smiled. She then retrieved a dark gray bracelet and placed it on the table. I happened to come across this treasure by chance. However, it's no longer useful to me. If you can afford it, this item can be yours. This is... Shifeng was stunned when he saw the dark gray bracelet. The bracelet looked ordinary, like nothing more than a string of dark gray beads. However, the golden stigmata indicated that it was one of the 7 treasures. Unfortunately, due to severe damage, it was only an epic item. Bracelet of Time, epic rank item. This bracelet had once possessed the frightening power of time. Unfortunately, it has sustained heavy damage. Additional active skill dash. Temporal Sand. Can produce temporal sand by absorbing mana stones. No cooldown. Each mana stone produces 2 grains of temporal sand. After sustaining damage and being tainted by evil energy, the evil energy within will taint the item's wearer as well. Drops on death. This is one of the 7 treasures? Shifeng stared at the bracelet of time in shock. Although mana stones were expensive and difficult to obtain, temporal sand was far more valuable. It also had far more uses. Practically every lifestyle class could use it. Meanwhile, by using the bracelet of time, one only needed to invest 1 mana stone to obtain 2 temporal sand grains. It was certainly a profitable exchange. He had always wondered how the Countess got her hands on so much temporal sand. It turned out that it was thanks to one of the 7 treasures. However, it seemed that his previous visit had interrupted Katie Green's plans, forcing the Countess to collect a large number of mana stones and convert them into temporal sand as quickly as possible. However, the Countess's asking price was exorbitant. She wanted for 100,000 mana stones for the bracelet. Even if he had the Philosopher's Stone, synthesizing 100,000 mana stones would cost him 5 million mana stones. With Zero Wing's current net income, it would take months to save up that many magic crystals. As for stealing the bracelet of time, even if Shifeng had 100 lives, he would not dare do so. Countess, may I know if I can trade mana stones for these items if I visit you in the future? Shifeng asked. If Countess Katie Green had only offered this bracelet of time on a whim, it would be out of his hands. If she were selling it long-term, however, he would have a chance to purchase it. As long as he obtained the manatite vein on Karna Island and maintained his hold on the rapidly developing Stone Forest town, he could collect 5 million magic crystals given enough time. He was only afraid that the Countess's offer was a one-time chance. Hearing Shifeng's question, Katie Green fell silent for a moment, following which she replied, "The other items will be available in the future, but I don't want to hold on to this bracelet for long. I am prepared to sell it on the black market to the highest bidder in a month. If you can gather 100,000 mana stones before the auction, I'll sell it to you instead." A month, huh? Shifeng frowned. Although it was good news that the Countess wasn't only offering the bracelet right now, the time limit wasn't. Aside from giants like super guilds, collecting 5 million magic crystals in a month was a dream. The various large guilds spent a large amount of magic crystals every day. Even powerful first-rate guilds could only save 4,000 or 5,000 crystals per day. Unless he could save up around 170,000 magic crystals each day, gathering 5 million in 1 month would be impossible. As Shifeng racked his brain for a solution, Katie Green smiled and said, "If you are interested in the bracelet of time, I can give it to you even if you don't have 100,000 mana stones. You see, I've recently encountered a little trouble. If you help me deal with this problem, I am willing to offer the bracelet as compensation." Chapter 1442, Another Method. Chapter 1442, Another Method. I just need to help you with this problem? Shifeng gave the Countess a confused look. He hadn't expected another option to be available. Honestly, even a super guild would be hard-pressed to collect 5 million magic crystals within a month. Even with the manatite vein, it would be a challenge. Sadly, it'd be impossible to obtain 100,000 mana stones any other way. After all, not everyone was lucky enough to have a fragment of the Philosopher's Stone. Without the Philosopher's Stone, a guild's main source of mana stones would be bosses in 100-man dungeons. Having their alchemists synthesize mana stones would be impractical as well. Doing so would even bankrupt a super guild. That's right. I need someone to help me retrieve an item. However, the item is in a somewhat special location. The higher a visitor's tier is, the more dangerous the location is. Since you are only tier 2, you should have a chance of securing the item, Katie Green said, nodding. Suddenly, however, she chuckled softly and said, "But before you go, you'll have to pass the test of strength." "Countess, I am willing to give it a try." Shifeng agreed without hesitation. This was an opportunity to obtain one of the 7 treasures. Naturally, he couldn't afford to turn it down. Besides, the quest was far more reliable than affording the unrealistic price of 5 million magic crystals. Throughout their conversation, Shifeng had understood one thing. The later he discovered Countess Katie Green's ownership of the Bracelet of Time, the harder it would be to obtain it. She had already stated that the quest would become more dangerous as one reached higher tiers, lowering the player's chances of success. "Good. Follow me." Katie Green then stood and walked towards a dark corridor in a corner of the indoor garden. The corridor was narrow, and the only light came from candles set in intervals. As they ventured further down the corridor, the air became colder. After walking for about 10 minutes or so, they arrived in an empty hall. A set of locked, steel doors loomed at the end of the room. The steel doors were entirely covered in frost. Even though Shifeng's ice resistance was high, he was still cold. If a player with lower ice resistance came here, they'd freeze to death. Not bad. You've endured this far without my help. You have passed the first test. Katie Green nodded in approval when she noticed the cold barely affect Shifeng. Your second test is next, a test of your combat power. As Katie Green spoke, a silver magic scroll appeared in her hands. She unfurled it and began to chant an incantation. Suddenly, a silver magic array appeared before the Countess, gathering the surrounding mana. A moment later, a 3-meter-tall humanoid creature manifested in the middle of the array. This humanoid figure wore silver armor and carried a great sword that radiated frosty air. Unlike ordinary humans, dark green flames danced in the figure's eyes. Hell Knight, Undead, Great Lord. Level 57. HP 15, 000/15, 000. Kill this Hell Knight, and you will pass the second test, Katie Green said as she gestured towards the Hell Knight. System. You have accepted Katie Green's second test. Quest content. Clear the second test. Your reward will vary depending on your evaluation. Before Shifeng could even read the system notification, the Hell Knight roared and unsheathed the great sword from its back. It dashed straight for Shifeng, giving him no time to prepare. The Great Lord ranked Hell Knight crossed the 20 yards, separating them in the blink of an eye. Upon arriving before Shifeng, the Hell Knight brandished its great sword, the weapon transforming into 3 streaks of silver light as they flew towards the swordsman. The Hell Knight had completed the entire process as smoothly as flowing water. The Hell Knight moved like an expert with years of combat experience. There were no excess movements in its actions. High intelligence. Shifeng was surprised to see the sword lights moving towards him. He had assumed that he'd have to face a weakened Great Lord, but the Hell Knight's combat techniques were clearly superior to ordinary Great Lords. The Great Lord had obviously reached the half-step refinement realm standard. In response, Shifeng countered with Killing Ray. Bang, bang, bang. Sparks scattered as a series of clangs echoed throughout the empty hall. Shifeng was forced back by 5 steps before he could stabilize his body. Meanwhile, 3 damages of over -1,500 appeared above his head. In contrast, the Hell Knight remained unharmed. Shifeng's counterattack had only paused the Great Lord's attack. After the initial clash, Shifeng knew that he was no match for the Hell Knight's strength. In fact, there was a large gap between them. What power! Shifeng began to take this fight seriously as the Hell Knight charged towards him once again. He immediately executed void steps, vanishing. Although Shifeng had only clashed with the Hell Knight for a moment, he had gained a rough prediction of the monster's standards. Not only did the Hell Knight have the strength of a Grand Lord, but its reactions and speed also ranked near the top among Great Lords of the same level. If not for his 3 fragmented legendary items, it would have already killed him. Not a bad technique. Unfortunately, it is useless against the Hell Knight. When Shifeng had disappeared, Katie Green had been slightly surprised. However, she shook her head and chuckled. The Hell Knight wasn't a living being, and although it could see, it could also rely on its ability to detect living beings during a fight. Even if Shifeng's footwork technique removed him from his opponent's sight, he couldn't erase his aura as a living creature. Unless he entered a different space entirely, the Hell Knight could keep track of him. Indeed, even after Shifeng had vanished, the Hell Knight showed no signs of hesitation. The massive creature thrust its great sword into the ground. Suddenly, dozens of ice swords rained down from above, targeting a seemingly unoccupied location. Before the ice swords struck the ground, their trajectories diverted as if they had encountered an invisible wall. At the same time, Shifeng reappeared. Each ice sword carried 100% of the Hell Knight's strength. As a result, Shifeng lost a little bit of his HP each time he deflected an ice sword. In less than a second, he had lost over 20,000 HP. While Shifeng dealt with the descending ice swords, the Hell Knight pulled its weapon from the ground and ran at the swordsman. As it reached Shifeng, it swung its greatsword skillfully, matching the timing of its swings with the final 8 ice swords. Each of the monster's swings targeted Shifeng's blind spots. This must be his limit. Not bad. His score should be above 70. Seeing Shifeng's HP near 0, Katie Green prepared to cast a buff. There was no doubt that the Hell Knight was strong. Even a peak, Tier 3 NPC of the same level would struggle in a fight against it, much less a Tier 2 player. She hadn't wanted to lend Shifeng a hand until now because she wanted to see how long the player would hold his ground against the Great Lord. As for her requirement for killing the Hell Knight, she had merely said that to ensure that Shifeng would fight with everything he had. Actually killing the Hell Knight would take a miracle. After all, the Hell Knight was an advanced combat servant she had obtained after plenty of trials. Every count and countess in the Black Dragon Empire longed for one themselves, but only she had control of an advanced combat servant. Just before Katie Green stopped the battle, a blue light flashed before the Hell Knight's descending greatsword. Suddenly the Hell Knight flew through the air. Its remaining 8 ice swords shattered instantly. Golden, divine runes wrapped around Shifeng's entire body, and his aura had undergone a heaven-defying transformation. This was none other than the Heavenly Dragon's power. Shifeng hadn't intended to use Heavenly Dragon's power so soon, but the Hell Knight was far more powerful than he had expected. If he continued to hold back, he would only get himself killed. Alright, let's begin the second round. Shifeng shifted his gaze towards the Hell Knight, which had finally regained its footing and advanced. Chapter 1443, Advanced Combat Servant. Chapter 1443, Advanced Combat Servant. After upgrading Heavenly Dragon's breath, not only did Heavenly Dragon's power increase Shifeng's strength, but it also increased his agility. Shifeng reached the Hell Knight almost instantly, brandishing Abyssal Blade and killing Ray as he executed Sword's orbit. A galaxy of stars glittered around Shifeng, intertwining as they bombarded the Great Lord, which had just gotten back on its feet. Although the Hell Knight's combat standards were at the half-step refinement realm, it was a child in Shifeng's eyes. He easily grasped the monster's blind spots and attack trajectories. Shifeng could have easily dodged the Hell Knight's attacks, but he had chosen to repulse them instead. Now that he had activated Heavenly Dragon's power, his strength was slightly higher than a Grand Lord's of the same level. Hence, he was stronger than the Hell Knight. If he chose to dodge the incoming attacks, he would only reduce his opportunities to deal damage. Boom, boom, boom. One sword light after another clashed with the Hell Knight's greatsword, the resulting impacts forcing the Great Lord back and preventing it from stabilizing its posture. After 6 consecutive attacks, the Hell Knight lost its grip on its weapon as the greatsword flew from the monster's hands. Die. Shifeng activated Flame Burst, a blinding glow enveloping his blades. He assaulted the defenseless Hell Knight with a series of devastating blows. Minus 164,878. Minus 331,478. Minus 332,015. All 15 attacks found their marks, causing the Great Lord's HP decrease at a tremendous rate. In an instant, the Hell Knight had lost 20% of its HP. Meanwhile, Flame Burst's terrifyingly destructive power sent the Hell Knight crashing into the frozen steel doors, and they shuddered upon impact. Taking advantage of the Hell Knight's incapacitated state, Shifeng hurriedly activated Lightning Edge. He couldn't normally use the attack in a high-speed battle due to Lightning Edge's 0.5-second channeling time, but the injured Hell Knight had collapsed to the ground. He had more than enough time to activate the skill. Numerous silver sword lights danced before Shifeng, forming a silver river that flowed towards the Hell Knight. Minus 244,678. Minus 243,167. Lightning Edge's powerful assault incapacitated the Hell Knight once more. The Great Lord was defenseless as the countless sword lights bit into its flesh. After 5 seconds, the Hell Knight only had 2/3 of its HP remaining. Despite dealing 2 successful blows, Shifeng had no intentions on relaxing his offense. The moment Lightning Edge ended, Shifeng appeared before the Hell Knight and swung the Abyssal Blade down towards the Great Lord. However, the Hell Knight quickly responded. At a critical moment, it reclaimed its greatsword and used it as a shield, blocking Shifeng's blade. Unfortunately, while it had held off the Abyssal Blade, it couldn't do anything about the 9 sword shadows that had appeared around it. Tier 2 skill Shadow Blade. In the end, all 9 shadows carved into the Hell Knight, devouring the Great Lord's HP at a rate visible to the naked eye. He's overwhelmed it. Surprise flashed in Countess Katie Green's eyes as she watched Shifeng dominate her Hell Knight. She had never thought that a mere Tier 2 player of the same level could surpass her advanced combat servant. Not even she could have done so when she had been Tier 2. Soloing a Great Lord of the same level was difficult for a Tier 2 class. Great Lord's HP was simply too high. These monsters' battle recovery alone was enough to overwhelm a Tier 2 player. However, Katie Green didn't recognize Shifeng for the monster he was. Despite only being a Tier 2 player, Shifeng wielded 3 fragmented legendary items. Although none of them were weapons, their overall effects were astonishing. Moreover, the Hell Knight wasn't actually a Great Lord of the same level. After all, it only had 15 million HP. An ordinary level 57 Great Lord should have at least 40 million HP. If not for the Hell Knight's strength and high combat standards, Shifeng could have easily defeated it without a berserk skill. Now that he had activated Heavenly Dragon's power, suppressing the Hell Knight was a piece of cake. Interesting. Truly interesting. He had held back so much of his strength. Katie Green's lips curled into a smile as she watched Shifeng shave off the Hell Knight's HP. However, I'm afraid that the unstable power of a berserk skill isn't enough to defeat my Hell Knight. When the Hell Knight's HP fell to 30%, it released a sudden and deafening roar. Its silver armor shattered, causing such a powerful shockwave that even Shifeng had to step back. As the silver armor fell away, it revealed the Hell Knight's crimson skin. Shifeng also noticed dark blue, divine runes all over the Hell Knight's tough hide, radiating a daunting pressure. The green flames in the monster's eyes also turned dark blue, its chilling gaze causing Shifeng to shudder. It's gone berserk? Shifeng went on the defensive as he watched the Great Lord transform. This monster was like a completely different being compared to the Hell Knight from a second ago. Berserk. Katie Green smiled. Shaking her head, she said, "This is not some kind of berserk mode. It is merely liberating its power. I specifically make the creature wear the armor to suppress most of its power." Advanced combat servants weren't like monsters and puppets. They fought their way to victory in the black market's death arena. Servants that won 20 consecutive matches in the arena became basic combat servants, while those that won 50 consecutive matches were intermediate combat servants. A combat servant would only rise to advanced rank after winning 100 consecutive matches. Hence, combat servants were generally stronger than beings of the same tier. Needless to say, a Tier 3 advanced combat servant was extraordinarily powerful. This was why the other counts and countesses in the Black Dragon Empire wanted their own advanced combat servant. However, advanced combat servants were incredibly expensive. Everyone was a combat genius. Most nobles couldn't afford one. They generally settled for a few intermediate combat servants. After the Hell Knight removed its armor, its attributes underwent a qualitative transformation. Its rank had also increased from Great Lord to Grand Lord. Without the armor, the Hell Knight's mobility increased as well. Now, its combat standards had reached the refinement realm. I wonder how long you'll last against it? Katie Green chuckled. So far, Shifeng had displayed more strength than she had expected. He had earned 100 points in his evaluation just by forcing the Hell Knight to abandon its armor. However, this had only fed the Countess's curiosity, and she wanted to see how far this player could go. So, this is the test to obtain one of the 7 treasures? Shifeng could not help his bitter smile as he watched the Hell Knight slowly approach. Having the power to solo a Grand Lord of the same level was ridiculous. Moreover, this Grand Lord's combat standards were on par with refinement realm experts. When the Hell Knight raised its great sword, Shifeng took in a deep breath. Come. Shouting, Shifeng activated Tier 2 Blade Liberation, his attributes skyrocketing once more. He then swung the abyssal blade to meet the incoming greatsword. When the two weapons collided, sparks illuminated the dark hall. The resulting shockwave sent dust and debris into the air. What? The Countess's mouth twitched when Shifeng blocked the Hell Knight's attack. He was still holding back. After the clash, the Hell Knight was forced to take 5 steps backward. In contrast, Shifeng hadn't moved an inch. He then dashed at the Grand Lord. Although Shifeng's strength wasn't as high as mythic monsters of the same level after activating twofold Berserk, he wasn't far from it. The Hell Knight, which was only a Grand Lord, was no match for him. Without using any skills, Shifeng effortlessly broke through the Hell Knight's defenses with only sword's orbit. As slash after slash split the Hell Knight's iron-like skin, the monster's HP plummeted. When only 1% of the Hell Knight's HP remained, a golden light enveloped the monster. The Hell Knight transformed into a stream of blue smoke that flowed back into the magic scroll in Katie Green's hands. System, Congratulations. You have completed Katie Green's second test. Chapter 1444, Rewards of SSS-rank Evaluation. Chapter 1444, Rewards of SSS-rank Evaluation. Following the system notification of the test completion, Shifeng received another system notification. System. Test Evaluation, 200 points. Test Evaluation Rank, SSS rank. Rewarding 20 free Mastery points, 5 Legacy Skill points, 300 million EXP, and Countess Katie Green's favorability increased by 30 points. It's just a test, yet it awarded so many Legacy Skill points? The system notification astonished Shifeng. Generally, players were lucky to get 1 or 2 Legacy Skill points after completing a high-rank hidden quest, yet he had received 5 points after qualifying for the quest. One could easily imagine the bountiful rewards from the quest itself. To think you would actually defeat my Hell Knight, you really are a shocking adventurer, Katie Green, who stood some distance away, said with satisfaction. I'm even more confident that you can get the item for me. Since you've passed my test, take this as a gift. Saying so, the Countess revealed a blue gemstone with a chilling aura. The moment this gemstone appeared, the already chilly temperature dropped further. The surrounding mana gathered to the stone in a frenzy, forming a vortex. Is that the Azure Source Stone? Shifeng exclaimed when he saw the mesmerizing gemstone in Katie Green's hand. God's domain had many kinds of attribute gemstones. However, the attribute source stones were a rank above. Attribute source stones were worth thousands of gold, but unlike attribute gemstones, players could only equip one of each kind of source stone. Although attribute gemstones only increased a specific attribute source stones could increase 2 or more. Take the Azure Source Stone for example. Not only did it increase physique by 5% when equipped, but it also increased ice resistance by 20%. An Azure Source Stone could have easily gone for 6,000 or 7,000 gold in the past, but only a fool would sell one. Normally, one would have traded an Azure Source Stone for a piece of epic equipment with high attributes. It is indeed. Moreover, it's an intermediate Azure Source Stone, Katie Green said, nodding. With this item you'll have an easier time fetching my item. You don't have enough ice resistance right now to survive the area. An intermediate Azure Source Stone? Shifeng could not believe that Katie Green was actually so generous. Attribute Source Stones were divided into 4 ranks: Basic, Intermediate, Advanced, and Peak. Basic Attribute Source Stones alone were incredibly valuable. In the past, a top-tier expert would be lucky to equip 1 or 2 Basic Attribute Source Stones. Even after 10 years in God's domain, Shadow had only acquired a single Intermediate Attribute Source Stone. Unlike gemstones, one couldn't increase an Attribute Source Stone's rank by synthesizing lower-ranked stones. These treasures could only be obtained from Grade 1 Forbidden Lands. As for Basic Attribute Source Stones, they could be found in Grade 2 Forbidden Lands. Though only Dark Gold treasure chests and Mythic-ranked bosses and above had a chance of dropping them. Yet, Katie Green was generous enough to give him an Azure Source Stone. Intermediate Azure Source Stone. Only one can be equipped at a time. Equipment requirement. Level 50. All attributes plus 120. Increases physique by 8%. Increases ice resistance by 30%. The attribute bonus from one Azure Source Stone was already higher than that of top-tier level 50 Dark Gold equipment. Furthermore, it boosted physique and ice resistance. After receiving the intermediate Azure Source Stone, he replaced one of his Tier 3 Strength gemstones without hesitation. What Shifeng didn't know was that the Countess had intended to give him the basic Azure Source Stone before he had surprised her with his performance. Not only had Shifeng's basic attributes increased after equipping the Source Stone, but his 5 senses sharpened as well. When he had first entered the hall, he had felt slightly cold, but now he didn't feel it at all. Very good. Now I'll send you to the Ice Crystal World. Once you're there, collect 10 Eternal Ice Crystals for me. Bring them back, and the Bracelet of Time is yours, Katie Green explained, nodding in approval as Shifeng relaxed, no longer affected by the room's temperature. System. You have accepted Countess Katie Green's epic ranked main storyline quest, Ice Crystal World. Quest content. Collect 10 Eternal Ice Crystals from the Ice Crystal World. Quest reward, Bracelet of Time. Why is this an epic ranked main storyline quest? A frown pulled at Shifeng's lips when he read the system notification. Main storyline quests could significantly affect a kingdom or empire. These effects could be beneficial, but they could also be damaging. They were far more difficult than other quests of the same rank. Although the quest location wasn't a forbidden land on the God's Domain continent, the Ice Crystal World was a forbidden land. Only now did Shifeng understand why Katie Green had told him that the higher one's tier was, the more danger they would face in the quest location. The Ice Crystal World was a world of its own and highly opposed to visiting life forms. The stronger the life form was, the more rejection they would face. Upon entering the world, various aspects would attempt to suppress the newcomer. At the same time, foreign life forms entering this world would possess unique auras. Meanwhile, the stronger this aura was, the easier it would be to attract the old monsters of the Ice Crystal World. Not even Tier 5 NPCs were a match for those old monsters. Tier 6 gods weren't even allowed to enter. Alright, I'll open the teleportation gate now. I can only maintain the gate for 1 or 2 seconds, so you need to be fast. Otherwise, you'll have to wait another month before I can open the gate again, Katie Green warned Shifeng. In other words, Shifeng only had one opportunity to challenge her quest. If he failed, he would have to earn 5 million magic crystals to purchase the Bracelet of Time. I understand. Shifeng nodded. Inwardly, though, he felt some contempt towards the Countess. Other players might not know what eternal ice crystals were, but he did. It was rumored that the eternal ice crystal contained eternal power. Eternal power was crucial in helping NPCs reaching Tier 6. In the past, many players with Dark Gold personal guards had only been able to upgrade their NPCs to Tier 5. It was due to the lack of eternal power that these guards had never crossed that final hurdle. Hence, items containing eternal power like the eternal ice crystal had been priceless in the past. One could only have traded rare materials or items of equal value for them. Yet this woman wanted him to obtain eternal ice crystals from the Ice Crystal World. How could they possibly be that easy to acquire? Moreover, she wanted 10 of them. But Shifeng couldn't care less right now. Zero Wing simply wasn't equipped to collect 5 million magic crystals. He had no other choice. If he succeeded, he would obtain one of the 7 treasures, and with the golden stigmata he could use the item better than Katie Green. Once Shifeng had prepared himself, Katie Green began to chant an incantation. Immediately, mana surged towards the shut, steel gates, slowly forcing them open. A stable, spatial tunnel formed beyond the open doors. Hurry! Katie Green shouted. Ignoring his weakened state, Shifeng activated Windwalk and jumped into the spatial tunnel, departing the icy hall. Chapter 1445, Ice Crystal World. Chapter 1445, Ice Crystal World. Inside a snow-capped canyon, a party of 6 fought a level 48, High Lord-ranked Ice-Toothed Tiger. Ice-Toothed Tiger, elemental creature, High Lord. Level 48. HP 31, 000, 000/31, 000, 000. A level 45 shield warrior wielding a crimson longsword and aqua blue buckler stood before this 5-meter-tall monster, and despite its size, it was powerless against the player. Regardless of how the Ice-Toothed Tiger tried to attack the shield warrior, the latter blocked the blows and found gaps to strike, using his skills to deal 6,000 to 7,000 damage per hit. The shield warrior's party members were also quite capable. Not only were they all level 44 and above, but their skills and spells also dealt over -10,000 damage. Their normal attacks alone dealt over -3,000 damage. Everyone, the boss is almost dead. Increase your damage output. Make sure you dodge its AoE skill, the shield warrior named Solitary 9 said calmly as he blocked another of the Ice-Toothed Tiger's attacks. Commander, relax. This isn't our first time killing an Ice-Toothed Tiger, a level 44 white-clad summoner a short distance away scoffed. The rest of the party members nodded. When the Ice-Toothed Tiger's HP reached 30%, its snow-white fur turned vermilion as it went berserk. Its size and attack speed increased as well. A moment later, icicles began to rain down from the sky, covering a 50-yard radius around the Ice-Toothed Tiger. Seeing this, Solitary 9 shouted as he activated Shield Wall. He then skillfully dodged the descending icicles and focusing on defense. Despite the boost to the Ice-Toothed Tiger's strength and speed, it still couldn't break through Solitary 9's defense. In the end, all of its attacks met the shield warrior's round shield, significantly reducing its damage. At the same time, the female druid in the back waved her dark green staff as she cast Healing Wind. Although the shield warrior was her main target, the rest of her party received a healing buff, gaining over 1,500 HP every second. This kept everyone's HP above a safe level. Every player in the party launched a fierce assault. As a result, the High Lord's HP decreased rapidly. From 30%, it very quickly dropped to 15%. When the High Lord's HP reached 10%, these players launched every skill they had. When the Ice-Toothed Tiger only had 2% of its HP remaining, several scorching flame spears flew in from a distance, striking the High Lord and devouring its remaining HP. As the Ice-Toothed Tiger collapsed, it dropped 5 items. Confused, the party members turned towards the flame spear's origin. A 20-man team stood in the snow some distance away. A male elementalist wielding a Tier 2 magic scroll seemed to be its leader. This elementalist smiled at the 6 party members. "Featherwind, what is the meaning of this?" Solitary 9 demanded with an ugly expression. "What is the meaning of this?" The elementalist named Featherwind chuckled. "Isn't it obvious? I'm kill-stealing. What else would I be doing? Our guild leader admires you and has invited you and your adventurer team to join our matchless family. If you decline, the Aurora Sword adventure team will never again find any success in Cold Wind City." The female druid named Yenya growled from behind Solitary 9, "You guys are going overboard. Since Big Brother Solitary has already determined that we won't get involved with the struggle between your guilds, we won't join either side." Because of Matchless Family's harassment, their adventurer team had ventured to this deserted area to level, yet these people had followed them so far from Cold Wind City to steal their boss. "Overboard?" Featherwind laughed. "Winner takes all in this place. Now that the competition over Cold Wind City has reached its peak, our guild leader will not allow any mishaps. Of course, our guild leader highly values experts like Brother 9. If Brother 9 joins our guild, he'll at least become the lead MT for one of our main forces. Yet our guild leader has waited for so long and still Brother 9 refuses. Since we can't recruit you, we'll make sure no one can have you. This is your last invitation. Brother 9, will you join us or not?" "You. How can you do such a thing?" Anxiety tightened Yenya's chest. The Matchless Family was one of Cold Wind City's 2 large guilds. It had plenty of experts under its command. If it really decided to move against their Aurora Sword adventurer team, the consequences would be unimaginable. Brother 9, before you answer, think this through carefully. Otherwise, the people around you might have some unexpected accidents. Who knows? If they're not careful, they might even fall back to level 0, Featherwind threatened, smiling. Yenya and the other party members' expressions darkened. Although they were strong, Matchless Family had too many experts. If they were ambushed, they would definitely die. But they couldn't leave Cold Wind City. In the end, this merciless guild would pick them off. "Aren't you afraid that we'll just join Centurion Dynasty?" Solitary 9 asked, his tone as cold as the snow beneath his feet. One of Cold Wind City's 2 large guilds was Matchless Family, while the other was Centurion Dynasty. It was due to the competition between these guilds for control of the city that the Aurora Sword suffered. "You're free to join those bastards, of course, but don't think that you'll leave this place alive." As Featherwind finished speaking, he waves his hand. At the same time, he pulled an ancient pitch-black scroll, which radiated a heart-rending evil, from his bag. Suddenly, over 100 players from Matchless Family began to appear around Solitary 9's party. These players had concealed their presence with a group invisibility scroll. However, the shield warrior was far more afraid of the magic scroll in Featherwind's hand than he was of the players surrounding them. "To think you even prepared a Dead Soul scroll? You people from Matchless Family think too highly of me," Solitary 9 said, smiling bitterly as he stared at the black scroll. The Dead Soul scroll was a special magic scroll that could curse a target player. If the player died within a certain amount of time, their death penalty would multiply, and they would lose between 3 and 5 levels. Most guilds saved the super rare scroll for important targets. "Of course. I've already told you how important you are to our guild leader. As proof, he personally ordered me to use this scroll," Featherwind said, chuckling. "Well, what is your decision, Brother 9? However, as Solitary 9 contemplated his options, a black vortex appeared in the sky above him. A black shadow shot down from the vortex, landing between the Aurora Sword Party and Matchless Family's tyrants. This shadow was none other than Sherphone. "This is the Ice Crystal World?" Sherphone could not help but glance around him. Immediately, he discovered the players engaged in a confrontation. Every one of these players stared at him in shock. Although Shifeng had heard about the Ice Crystal World, he had never visited it. However, he wasn't surprised to find players here. After all, it wasn't unusual to find players in other worlds. Take the Dark Den for example. Despite being home to demons, many players lived there. What did surprise Shifeng were the players' levels. All of these players were at least level 44. There were even quite a few level 45 players. Who are you? Don't you realize that Matchless family is trying to conduct business here? Featherwind haughtily demanded. Chapter 1446, Instant Kill. Chapter 1446, Instant Kill. Hearing Featherwind's question, Shifeng turned to look at the man. Although Featherwind was a level 45 elementalist, his equipment was ordinary for his level. Only half of his equipment consisted of level 40 dark gold equipment, while the other half consisted of level 40 fine gold equipment. As for the other level 44 players, only a small number possessed one or two pieces of dark gold equipment, while most didn't even have one. It was astounding to see. At this stage of the game, at least half of the equipment worn by the various large guilds experts should be level 40 dark gold rank. It wasn't even surprising to see an expert in a full set of dark gold equipment. After all, God's Domain's mainstream players were still some distance from level 40, so the demand for better equipment wasn't that high yet. Could the drop rate for level 40 equipment be low here? Shifeng guessed. God's Domain had many other worlds. Generally, expert players started to encounter these worlds after reaching level 40. Each world had a different development model. In the Dark Den, for example, players used different play styles from those in God's Domain. Leveling up must be easier in the Ice Crystal World. In return, though, the drop rate for equipment was lacking. Shifeng glanced around him again. Although he had just arrived, he easily inferred what was going on. Banditry was common everywhere after all. Although large forces fighting over a measly level 48 High Lord were still considerably rare. Of course, Shifeng was more interested in the Ice-Toothed Tiger's loot than he was in the situation before him. Not a single weapon or piece of equipment lay among the boss's loot. In fact, 4 of the 5 items that had dropped were materials, while the last was a Tier 2 magic scroll. Most players would curse their bad luck for such drops, but the High Lord's loot was shockingly attractive to a master forger like Shifeng. The 4 materials were extremely valuable, and the most valuable among them was the Arctic Manatite. This treasure was even difficult to obtain from a Manatite vein. A single ingot of Arctic Manatite would have sold for over 50 gold in the past. It was a necessary material for producing epic ranked weapons with ice effects. Shifeng was also surprised to find that his weakened debuff from activating twofold Berserk was gone, though his Berserk skills were still on cooldown. What? Didn't you hear what I just said? Featherwind's gaze turned frosty as he glared at Shifeng. He had only asked for the swordsman's identity due to his sudden appearance. Even with his observation skill, Shifeng's data listed as unknown. Since he was dealing with an unfamiliar player, he had mentioned his guild's name to gauge Shifeng's reaction. Matchless family was one of Cold Wind City's 2 major guilds. Everyone in the region recognized the name. The only power capable of competing with the guild was Centurion Dynasty. However, Shifeng seemed unaffected. The man even ignored him, Matchless family's vice guild leader. This was the first time he had encountered this situation since joining God's Domain. Let alone Solitary 9, Aurora Sword's commander, even Sky Slicer, Centurion Dynasty's guild leader, would not dare to disregard his existence. Is this guy a fool? Or is he scared senseless? He actually dares to ignore our vice guild leader? This guy is dead. After angering our vice guild leader, he'll probably have to delete his account. Matchless family's members watched Shifeng with ridicule and pity. They still remembered the adventurer team that had refused to leave their guild's leveling spot after Featherwind had warned them not to linger. In the end, Featherwind had led a force to slaughter the adventurer team over a dozen times. Those players had only lingered for about 10 seconds. Now, the mysterious man before them ignored Featherwind entirely. Not even the heavens could save him now. Suddenly, Solitary 9 sent Shifeng a whisper, "Friend, you best reply to his question and get out of here. He is the vice guild leader of Matchless family. He can easily eliminate anyone in Cold Wind City." Cold Wind City? The vice guild leader of Matchless family? Shifeng turned to Featherwind in surprise. Hearing Solitary Nine's warning, he realized that this world wasn't like the Dark Denver. This world had NPC cities, and by the looks of it, this matchless family guild seemed to rule over Coldwind City. However, the fact that a large guild's vice guild leader wore such poor equipment shocked Shifeng. Even the upper echelons in Starmoon Kingdom's large guilds were fully geared in level 40 dark gold equipment, much less the vice guild leaders. It seemed that the equipment standards here were far more than a little inferior to those in God's domain. It's too late for you to realize your mistake. When Featherwind saw Shifeng's surprise, he sneered and said, "I'll bury you alongside Solitary Nine and the others." Saying so, Featherwind activated the Dead Soul Scroll. Suddenly, a magic array appeared above Shifeng and the party from Aurora Sword. They all felt an evil presence wrap around them, and a special debuff appeared in their status windows. Soul Lock. Death penalty multiplied. Effect will persist after player has died. Duration, 12 hours. The Dead Soul Scroll? Surprise flashed in Shifeng's eyes once again when he saw his status window. The Dead Soul Scroll was a super rare magic scroll and the best tool to destroy an enemy. Not only did the scroll lack side effects, but it was also an AoE which made it impossible to dodge. If players died within the 12 hours, they would suffer a far more severe death penalty than normal. Meanwhile, the more times a player died during the debuff's duration, the heavier the penalty would become. Targets weren't even safe in NPC cities, and when they logged out of the game, the duration would pause until they logged back in. Only after 12 hours in God's domain would players be free of the debuff. Hence, the Dead Soul Scrolls were even as valuable as Tier 3 summoning scrolls. Most players avoid using them unless they had a deep hatred for their target. Friend, I truly apologize for this. I did not expect to drag you into my mess with Matchless Family. I'll do my best to open a path for you. Try to escape, Solitary Nine hurriedly said. He then turned towards his teammates and said, "You guys have to try to get away too." He was a shield warrior. He could never escape so many players without some special tool. He could only help his allies get away. Commander. Big Brother Solitary? The other 5 party members worried for their commander. They were very familiar with Solitary Nine's strength. If he focused on getting away himself, he had some hope, but he had given that up to help them escape. Should Solitary Nine die, it would take a very long time to recover the lost EXP and equipment. Escape. Shifeng smiled and shook his head. He then slowly approached Featherwind. What is he trying to do? Yinya watched this newcomer in confusion. He's not trying to beg for mercy, is he? What a fool. That's Featherwind. If begging for mercy worked, he wouldn't have killed so many players in Coldwind City. Aurora Sword's members were flabbergasted as they stared at Shifeng. Featherwind was well known for his ruthlessness in Coldwind City. He was a vicious person that never accepted apologies. What? You want to beg for mercy? Featherwind sneered at Shifeng as the man moved closer. As everyone waited for the swordsman's reply, Shifeng vanished. Where is he? Featherwind searched his surroundings. Everyone was stunned. They had never seen a swordsman disappear like an assassin. In the next second, however, Shifeng reappeared beside Featherwind. Before anyone realized it, 2 sword lights blossomed on Featherwind's mage robes. The man's vision darkened as his lifeless body dropped to the ground. Chapter 1447. Monster-like Mysterious Expert. Chapter 1447. Monster-like Mysterious Expert. Silence dominated the area as every player stared at Featherwind's motionless corpse. Although Shifeng had not used any impressive techniques or skill, everyone was petrified. They even forgot to breathe. What just happened? The Vice Guild leader is dead. Just what did he do? Everything had happened so quickly that by the time they reacted, Featherwind, a top-tier expert and Matchless Family's Vice Guild leader, was already dead. He died? This is impossible. That's Featherwind we're talking about. He might not rank among the top 10 in Coldwind City, but he is still a top-tier expert in the top 20. How could an expert like that die so quickly? Even Lifeless Thorn, Coldwind City's #1 expert, couldn't achieve such a feat. Could he be Lifeless Thorn? Lifeless Thorn is a berserker. That guy is a swordsman. There's no way he's Lifeless Thorn. Commander, do you know who that guy is? Even Aurora Sword's members were astonished. One of Coldwind City's top 20 experts had died in one hit. If news of this matter got out, it would shock everyone in the city. Solitary 9 stared at Shi Feng in confusion, his mind spinning to figure which expert in Cold Wind City this man was. As for the possibility of Shi Feng being from somewhere else, that was practically impossible. The only way in or out of the Cold Wind City region was through the Snow Rift, a forbidden land for players. Current players couldn't even enter the map, much less cross through it. This was why the city's players were so afraid of Matchless Family and Centurion Dynasty. Should they provoke either power, their life in Cold Wind City would become a living hell or end completely. However, no matter how Solitary 9 racked his brain, he couldn't match any of the city's experts to Shi Feng. Even Cleansing Whistle, the strongest swordsman in Cold Wind City, was only ranked 6th. Moreover, Cleansing Whistle was a woman, not a man, making it impossible for her to be the mysterious swordsman expert before him. I'm not sure either. But you should get ready. We'll use this opportunity to escape in a moment, Solitary 9 said in the team chat after pondering the situation for some time. Now that Featherwind was dead, the 100+ experts from Matchless Family had lost their commander. Hence, they had a high likelihood of escaping. Moreover, they had an expert like Shi Feng to hold the line, which further increased their chances. Featherwind had over 30,000 HP. Although he was an elementalist, the fact that Shi Feng had killed him without using skills meant that he could kill an MT of the same level with a handful of attacks. If Shi Feng's attack speed was high enough, he could even finish off an MT before the enemy healers could react. As long as no one could pin the swordsman down, their party could safely retreat. Suddenly, Matchless Family's members snapped out of their daze. Their leader had died, yet they had stared blankly at the killer for so long. They all discarded their fear and pounced on Shi Feng. Die. Brat, you're dead. You dare kill our vice guild leader? From today on, we'll hunt you to the end of the world. The Matchless Family's experts charged at Shi Feng. They were so focused on killing the newcomer that they ignored Aurora Sword's members. They all understood that if news of this reached Cold Wind City, they could kiss their lives goodbye. If they let Shi Feng escape after killing Featherwind in front of them, what hope did they have of mingling in Cold Wind City? Fireballs, frost arrows, and arrows flew towards Shi Feng from all directions. Watching from a distance, Solitary 9's expression darkened. Not even a shield warrior like himself could block so many attacks at a time. He'd be lucky to block 60 or 70% of the attacks. If dozens of attacks hit him at once, he'd only last a few seconds even with shield wall active. However, a galaxy of stars suddenly formed around Shi Feng. These stars crushed the various spells and arrows as they came within 10 yards of the swordsman. It was as if the stars had formed a magic barrier around Shi Feng. No matter how many attacks flew towards Shi Feng, none of them hit their mark. In fact, the bombardment hadn't even reduced Shi Feng's HP by a single point. What kind of skill is that? Every player watching was stupefied. Meanwhile, after Shi Feng had deflected a volley, Matchless Family's dozens of melee players moved in to strike. Charge. Chop. Shadow Assault. Flame Slash. One skill after another collided with Shi Feng's sword's orbit. The moment these melee players encountered sword's orbit, they were thrown backward like cannonballs. Some nearly lost their grip on their weapons from the powerful impact. Moreover, these melee players had lost a visible chunk of their HPs. Even the Guardian Knights and Shield Warriors lost over 2,000 HP, and they had only received the damage from assaulting Shi Feng with their shields. The other classes lost around 4,000 HP. 4,000 damage would even reduce an MT's HP by 1/10. How is this possible? Solitary 9 and his companions watched, dumbfounded. Don't be afraid of this trash. We have healers to recover our HP. I refuse to believe his skill can last forever. A member from Matchless Family shouted to his team. The other members nodded in response. They eyed Shi Feng from the sidelines, waiting until the duration of whatever skill he was using came to an end. What? You don't want to play anymore? Shi Feng shook his head and chuckled when he saw his opponent's hesitation. Since you won't come to me, I'll come to you. He had simply focused on defense to get a better idea of these players' combat standards. He had only instant-killed Featherwind to instill shock and fear into these players. Now that the enemy commander was dead, the remaining 100+ experts were little more than test subjects to help him understand players' standards in the Ice Crystal world. Following which, Shi Feng advanced and instantly appeared before a level 44 shield warrior, the sacred sword in his hand smoothly descending from an angle that the shield warrior couldn't evade. So fast. The shield warrior raised his shield in a panic. At the same time, his feet also unconsciously took a step back. The instant killing ray met the fine gold-ranked shield, it left a scar in the metal, and the resulting impact threw the player over a dozen yards away. The shield warrior's HP fell by over 2,400. Following which, Shifeng brandished his swords at the nearby MTs. Without exception, he sent every MT flying. Monster. He isn't a player. He's a monster. Matchless Family's members were petrified as they watched Shifeng toss about their MTs. Normally, they were lucky to land blocked attacks that dealt over -100 damage during duels with these MTs, yet they received over -2,000 damage from Shifeng's attacks. It was easy to imagine how horrifying the man's damage would be if they failed to block an attack. It seems the Ice Crystal World's players don't just have inferior equipment, but their combat standards are lower than players in God's domain as well. After clashing with Matchless Family's members several times, Shifeng gained a general understanding of these players' combat standards. Following which, he stabbed the abyssal blade into the ground and glanced at the frightened players before him, saying, "My experiment is over. Let's start the real battle." Abyssal Curse. Skywheel Sword. Suddenly, a dark fog bound every player within 30 yards of Shifeng. As these players tried to activate their control removal skills, countless divine swords descended from above. Shifeng then followed up with Killing Ray Summon Lightning, dealing 400% lightning damage to all enemies within a 15-yard radius. In the blink of an eye, almost every player within Summon Lightning's range turned to ash and disappeared, leaving weapons and equipment scattered across the battlefield. Only a few MTs and the players who had fled the attack's radius had survived. Chapter 1448, Shocking Cold Wind City. Chapter 1448, Shocking Cold Wind City. Who is he? An expert like this guy was hidden in Cold Wind City all this time? The Aurora Swords party members who had been about to flee were stupefied by the scene before them. They had never seen such a massive gap between players' strength. Even Zerg tactics would crumble against Shifeng. A second ago, over 100 players from Matchless Family had Shifeng surrounded. Now, however, only a dozen or so players were still standing. These players were only alive because they had reacted quickly enough, activating their life-saving skills upon realizing the severity of the situation. Otherwise, they too would have been electrocuted and turned to ash with their dead companions. Monster. Run. No one knew which player had shouted, but upon hearing the word run, every surviving Matchless Family member turned and fled as if a pistol had gone off to sign the start of some race. They all knew that if they fled as a group, none of them would get away, but Shifeng couldn't catch them all if they ran in different directions. However, contrary to expectations, Shifeng didn't immediately run after the feeling players. He simply sheathed his two swords and activated Chilling Field. Chilling Field covered a 50-yard radius. Upon activation, the skill enveloped every fleeing player. 9 dark gray swords appeared above the guild players. As Matchless Family's members focused on escape, they did not manage to react to the incoming attacks in time. As a result, the dark gray swords pierced their hearts with zero resistance, plundering the little HP they had remaining. After 2 waves of attacks, the last of Matchless Family's players transformed into particles of white light and disappeared, leaving only weapons and equipment in their places. Is he really a swordsman? Solitary 9 was thunderstruck as he watched the instantaneous slaughter. Among the dozen or so survivors, the closest had been 20 yards from Shifeng, while the farthest had been over 35 yards away, yet even from such a distance Shifeng obliterated them effortlessly. With such attack capabilities, could anyone escape this man's wrath? Solitary 9's party members stared at Shifeng, shock and fear dancing in their eyes. Although they had encountered plenty of experts before, they had never felt so powerless before one. It had taken Shifeng only a few moves to wipe out over 100 experts from Matchless Family. When they had first seen the swordsman, they hadn't thought much of him. However, chills crawled down their spines as they watched Shifeng calmly collect the loot littering the snowy ground. It was as if the thing walking towards them was some prehistoric beast, not a player. As Shifeng collected the dropped weapons and equipment, each item surprised him more than the last. Only a small fraction of the loot was system-made. Most of the weapons and equipment were crafted items. The lowest rank among these items was Secret Silver, while the highest quality items were dark gold rank. Every weapon and piece of equipment was level 40. Currently, even Zero Wing's prided candlelight trading firm could only mass-producing level 40 mysterious iron weapons and equipment. Only the top-ranking lifestyle players were capable of crafting level 40 fine gold weapons and equipment. Moreover, they could only craft a limited amount. One of the reasons for the low production volume was material rarity. Another reason was the low success rate, which resulted in high production costs. Rather than waste time trying to procure rare materials, most players simply purchased their weapons and equipment in the auction house. The fact that the majority of the weapons and equipment Matchless Family's members had dropped were player-made was inconceivable. The development of weapon and equipment production on God's Domain's continent was already quite fast, yet it was nothing compared to Ice Crystal World. While Shi Feng collected the scattered items, Solitary 9 took the initiative to approach the man. "Friend, thank you for earlier. If not for you, Matchless Family's members would have killed us. I am Solitary 9, the commander of the Aurora Sword Adventurer team." Solitary 9 introduced himself. "If you have any problems in Cold Wind City, please feel free to contact me." Although Aurora Sword wasn't one of Cold Wind City's top adventurer teams, it was relatively well known. The team had over 100 members in total, and although they were strong enough to make major changes in the city, they could deal with minor issues. The other party members nodded eagerly. They both feared and revered Shi Feng. If they spread the news about what had happened here, it would cause chaos in Cold Wind City. Matchless Family was a peerless organization in Cold Wind City, yet Shi Feng had slaughtered over 100 of its experts by himself. He was a monster-like existence. Countless players dreamed of befriending an expert like him. Cold Wind City? After giving the matter some thought, Shi Feng asked, "Can you tell me a little about the situation in Cold Wind City?" He had practically no understanding of the ice crystal world, let alone any clues leading to eternal ice crystals. Now that Katie Green had sent him here, if he did not acquire the required eternal ice crystals within a month, he would have a far more difficult time obtaining the Bracelet of Time. The first thing he needed to do was learn about the situation here. Once he did, he'd have an easier time searching for the eternal ice crystals. "Tell you about Cold Wind City?" Solitary 9 was taken aback. He quickly recovered from his surprise and asked, "Could it be that you're not a player from this region?" The others were similarly dumbfounded. Everyone knew that unless one crossed the Snow Rift, it was impossible to leave or enter the Cold Wind City region. "That's right. I'm not from this area." Shi Feng nodded, feeling no particular need to hide the truth. After all, players in other worlds didn't always stay there. As they reached higher levels, the system would gradually integrate them into the rest of the game. Besides, it's not like they could do anything about his origin. Realization dawned Solitary 9 and the others. It was no wonder why they had never seen a monster like Shi Feng in Cold Wind City. However, Solitary 9 and his companions couldn't help their rueful sighs. Solitary 9 was one of the top 3 MTs in Cold Wind City. He should rank near the top in other regions as well, but they had never imagined that other regions would have experts like this swordsman. It was easy to surmise that the expert standards in other regions were much higher than in Cold Wind City. This revelation was a mental blow. At the same time though, they were eager to leave their city and explore other maps. Only Solitary 9 and the others did not know that Shi Feng was not from a different region in the Ice Crystal world. Rather, he had come from God's Domain's continent. Even in his home region, Shi Feng only ranked among the top 100 on the God's Domain experts list. Following which, Solitary 9 explained some basic details and the general situation in Cold Wind City. Meanwhile, an uproar shook Cold Wind City. Matchless Family's failed attempt to annihilate the Aurora Sword Adventurer team had already reached the public. Not only had the guild member failed to kill a single player from the group, but hundreds of its experts had also been eliminated by some passing swordsmen. Chapter 1449, Becoming Famous in Cold Wind City. Chapter 1449, Becoming Famous in Cold Wind City. Cold Wind City, Matchless Family's guild residence. Over a dozen upper echelons occupied the residence's meeting room, an extraordinarily tense atmosphere. A middle-aged man on the guild leader's throne was the cause for this tension. This middle-aged man wore a suit of azure armor. Although he said nothing, the pressure he radiated chilled the room. Even a passing glance from this man felt like that of some ferocious beast. This middle-aged man was none other than Thundering Sky, Matchless Family's guild leader. In Cold Wind City, one word from him could easily decide whether a player lived or died. Right now, Thundering Sky's blood boiled with rage. Can someone tell me where this person came from? Thundering Sky frowned as he watched Shifeng's battle video. It's been so long since the incident, yet none of you know anything about him. Guild leader, we've launched a full investigation on the player. However, we have yet to uncover any information about him, one of the upper echelons answered, cold sweat chilling his forehead. Immediately after Featherwind died, the Elementalist had sent them an offline message, ordering them to focus all of their resources on investigating Shifeng. However, no matter how hard they searched, they found nothing about the swordsman. It was as if the man had suddenly appeared. This player has already killed over 100 of our members, but we don't even know his name. Garbage. Every one of you. Thundering Sky bellowed. Continue searching. Mobilize everyone. I want this person found. Since he dares to disrespect Matchless Family, then he shouldn't even dream of surviving in Cold Wind City. Understood. Everyone nodded and notified the guild's members to search for the swordsman. For a time, every member of Matchless Family hunted for Shifeng, killing intent igniting their hearts. Centurion Dynasty also held a meeting to discuss the situation. Interesting. Truly interesting. That person actually annihilated Featherwind's expert team. I don't think even Lifeless Thorn could do that, Sky Slicer, Centurion Dynasty's guild leader, said, laughing as he watched Shifeng's battle video. Matchless Family had been humiliated. Not only had the guild failed to kill Solitary 9, but it had also lost over 100 experts. Most importantly, a single player was responsible for all 100+ deaths. This had dealt a huge blow to Matchless Family's reputation. After all, winning a 1-on-5 expert battle was impressive. Even an expert like Lifeless Thorn should only be able to handle a dozen or so experts at a time. Yet, Shifeng had faced over 100 experts, and his victory had been overwhelming. Naturally, anyone who watched Shifeng's battle video would realize that the man was very powerful. However, those who had only heard about the massacre would assume that Matchless Family's experts were nothing but paper tigers. Suddenly, a female elementalist in white mage robes asked, "Guild leader, what should we do next?" "Since the Matchless Family wants to kill this player, we have to do the opposite," Sky Slicer said, laughing. "Rain, find him. Tell him that the Centurion Dynasty would like to welcome him with open arms." "What if he refuses?" Swirling Rain asked. "Refuses?" Sky Slicer snorted. "That's not an option. We're talking about Matchless Family after all. Even if he is strong as an individual, he can't take on the whole guild. He'll only be safe if he joins us." Understood. Swirling Rain then bowed and left the meeting room. Both of Cold Rain City's large guilds began their search for Shifeng. Meanwhile, the city's players were dumbfounded. What's going on? This person is awesome. Both large guilds are actually offering a high price for information about his whereabouts. Not even Lifeless Thorn has ever elicited such a reaction. There's no helping it. Although Lifeless Thorn doesn't belong to any guild, his adventurer team, Waveheart, is a top adventurer team with over 3,000 members. It has over 300 experts. 3 of the city's top 10 experts belong to the adventurer team as well. The guilds would have to weigh their options seriously before moving against Lifeless Thorn. That's right. This player is doomed. He killed so many of Matchless Family's players. The guild won't rest until they kill him back to level 0. Both guilds are offering such a high price. They're already offering 2 gold for any information about the man's current location. The independent players on Cold Wind City streets quietly discussed the new player, every one of them admiring Shifeng's courage. In Cold Wind City, no one aside from Centurion Dynasty dared to provoke Matchless Family. Independent players often resented the 2 large guilds. Unfortunately, since both guilds were so powerful, they had no choice but to endure their suffering. Hence, when they had heard the news of Shifeng slaughtering over 100 experts from Matchless Family, they quietly celebrated. As the city's players chatted about the recent events, 7 players arrived in the teleportation hall. These players were none other than Shifeng and the party from Aurora Sword. After Solitary 9 had offered a general explanation of Cold Wind City, Shifeng had decided to pay the city a visit. Hence, Solitary 9 had given Shifeng a few return scrolls for Cold Wind City so that he could return via teleportation alongside his people. Cold Wind City was the only NPC city in this particular zone. The city's player population exceeded 2 million, and each of the large guilds had over 100,000 members. It was why the two guilds were able to rule over Cold Wind City. If Shifeng wanted to find more information about the Eternal Ice Crystals, Cold Wind City's library was undoubtedly the best place to do so. All of God's Domain's libraries collected information about their home locations. As soon as Shifeng's group left the teleportation hall, gasps erupted from the players outside of the building. Crap. Isn't that the expert that killed the Matchless family's experts? What? Does he not know that the guilds have mobilized their forces to find him? He must be insane. He actually ventured into the city? Does he think Matchless family is afraid of attacking him within the city walls? That might be the case. Unfortunately, he's underestimated the guild. Some time ago, some guy had provoked a few of Matchless family's members. In the end, they killed him over 10 times inside the city. The matter was only resolved after he paid the guild 10 gold and every weapon and piece of equipment he had. Quick! Notify Matchless family. These players were stupefied as they watched Shifeng stroll down the street, admiring the scenery. From time to time, Shifeng even entered a shop to browse its merchandise. After so recently provoking Matchless family, this man dared to show his face in Cold Wind City. From a certain perspective, Shifeng deserved to be called Cold Wind City's #1 player. Shortly after Shifeng's arrival, news reached both large guilds. What? He's shopping in the trade area? Are you sure? Sky Slicer could not help his shock upon hearing the latest report. I'm absolutely sure. I've compared his face to the person in the video, the assassin confirmed, nodding seriously. I'll head there immediately. Notify the main force members and tell them to gather in the trade area as soon as possible. Sky Slicer hurriedly instructed after digesting the information. Meanwhile, in Matchless family's residence, when Thundering Sky received the news of Shifeng's appearance, he nearly shattered his desk. Daring bastard. After killing my subordinates, he still dares show his face. Notify every expert in the guild and tell them to hurry over. Halt all operations and quests temporarily. Thundering Sky bellowed. Chapter 1450, City of Crafters. Chapter 1450, City of Crafters. Cold Wind City, Trade Area. Commander, more people are tailing us now. Matchless families probably found out about our return already. Should we notify Big Brother Yifeng about? Yenya asked worriedly as she glanced at the players stalking them. News of the slaughter of Matchless family's members had already spread throughout the city. Yet now, the main culprit boldly walked down the city streets without a care in the world. It was a slap in the face to the guild. Once the Matchless family's members arrived, they would not leave without a fight. Thousands of players from Matchless City resided in the city. Killing a single player would be child's play for the guild. Furthermore, their group still had the soul lock debuff. Solitary 9 nodded in response to Yenya's question. Based on his understanding of Matchless family, the guild would seek revenge for the smallest of grievances. It wouldn't hesitate to take action against Shifeng even in the city. Although he trusted in Shifeng's strength, Matchless family had the home ground advantage. Regardless of how powerful the man was, he was at a disadvantage. Solitary 9 walked up to Shifeng and whispered, "Brother Yifeng, why don't we head to the library? I'm afraid that if we linger around here any longer, Matchless family's members will find us. Dealing with them will be troublesome." Troublesome? Curious, Shifeng asked, do players have full power over the city? Solitary 9 hadn't gone into the management style in the Ice Crystal World's NPC cities. If these cities were like the Dark Den shelters, where players had full authority to determine a city's rules, they would indeed have some trouble to deal with. That's not the case. Matchless family just has a lot of members inside the city, Solitary 9 said, shaking his head. Shifeng breathed a sigh of relief when he heard Solitary 9's reply. He then pointed at the Cold Wind auction house a short distance away and said, "That's all right then. I've already visited most of the shops, so let's make a trip to the auction house before we head to the library." This, Solitary 9 was speechless. The man even wondered if Shifeng understood what he meant by a lot of members. Cold Wind City was the Matchless family's main headquarters. The guild could easily gather over 10,000 players at a moment's notice. Centurion Dynasty was the only existence capable of contending with the guild in the city. Commander, what should we? Forget it. We'll just accompany him until the end. Hopefully, Thundering Sky can keep his cool and avoid doing anything rash. As Solitary 9 watched Shifeng leisurely approach the auction house, he struggled with various complex feelings. He could not understand what was going through Shifeng's mind. However, since Shifeng had saved his and his teammates' lives, he could not escape by himself. He could only pray that Matchless Family did not do anything too reckless. After all, they were currently standing in the heart of the city. Patrolling NPC guards were everywhere. If it really came down to a fight, Matchless Family would not have too much of an advantage either. Upon entering the auction house's main hall, the sight of players hawking their items greeted Shifeng. Selling cheap, top-tier level 40 fine gold weapons. 10 gold per item. Get a 5% discount if you buy 2. Selling refined meteorite copper for 3 gold per stack. Selling frost steel ore for 1 gold per stack. The players selling items in the hall outnumbered the shopping players. The items these players were selling shocked Shifeng. On the God's Domain continent, even the cheapest level 40 fine gold weapon could sell for 15 gold or more, yet players here were offering the same for 10 gold each. Moreover, they were all player-made weapons. With how high current demand was for level 40 fine gold weapons in his world, he could easily turn a massive profit if he bought and resold these player-made weapons. As for the refined meteor copper, the rare forging material currently sold for 30 silver per ingot. Moreover, it was very difficult to purchase. Each stack, containing 20 ingots, sold for 6 gold, yet these players were selling each stack for half that. The various forging materials sold in the hall were all significantly cheaper than those in God's Domain. In addition, this world had an abundance of forging resources. Even empires famous for producing ores paled in comparison to the ice crystal world. This place is really impressive. It's a pity that I don't have a way to return once I leave. I guess I have no choice but to stock up on rare materials before I depart. Shifeng sighed ruefully as he looked through the various items these players offered. If he could travel between the Ice Crystal world and the God's Domain continent, he could earn more income from reselling items than what he earned from Stone Forest Town. Moreover, he could rely on the large quantity of materials to nurture the Candlelight Trading Firm's forgers. If luck would have it, he might nurture a few master forgers. After all, creating new items required experimentation with various materials. With so many rare materials in the Ice Crystal world, one could experiment to their heart's content. This was most likely the reason that the standard of Cold Wind City's forgers was far above those in the Candlelight Trading Firm. Based on Solitary 9's explanation, the Ice Crystal world should have other NPC cities. As players reached higher levels, Cold Wind City's guilds began to prepare to challenge the Snow Rift. It was only a matter of time before Cold Wind City's players encountered cities in other regions. At this point, Shifeng suspected that the Ice Crystal world had birthed the game's first master forger. However, purchasing a large amount of materials required a lot of coins, but he hadn't been carrying many when he had come to the Ice Crystal world. His only option was to make money by selling the Matchless family's secret silver and fine gold items for a low price. Unfortunately, the dark gold items were precious to Zero Wing, so Shifeng intended to hold on to them for now. After Shifeng finished putting the loot from Matchless family up for sale, he left the auction house and made his way to the library. Seeing Shifeng finally willing to leave this risky location, Solitary 9 and the others breathed a sigh of relief. However, as soon as they left the auction house, they were greeted by a shocking scene. Players crowded the street, and every one of them wore Matchless family's guild emblem. With a rough glance, they easily counted over 10,000 players. Matchless family's members radiated killing intent as they glared at Shifeng's group, scaring off any unrelated players. What's going on? Does Matchless family plan to monopolize the auction house? You don't know? Some expert killed a bunch of their members. They've come to deal with him. Do they need to go to such lengths though? Why would they dispatch so many people just for one player? The domineering display frightened the independent players on the street. Among the Matchless family members present, the lowest leveled member was level 43. Their equipment was awe-inspiring as well. Has the Matchless family lost its mind? Solitary 9 felt an unprecedented pressure. He had thought that, at most, Matchless family would send around 1,000 experts, He hadn't expected Thundering Sky to be mad enough to dispatch a 10,000-man army. Not even Lifeless Thorn, Cold Wind City's #1 expert, could elicit such a reaction. However, after Matchless Family's members had gathered in front of the auction house, another commotion shook the street. Another player army slowly approached from the other end of the street, and although this army was smaller than Matchless Family's, it still included around 3,000 players. These new arrivals wore Centurion Dynasty's guild emblem. For a time, experts from both of Cold Wind City's large guilds stood before the auction house's entrance. Following which, both guilds' leaders pulled away from the crowd. Both men looked at Shifeng. "You're the expert that killed Featherwind?" Thundering Sky and Sky Slicer asked in almost perfect unison. The spectating players were stupefied. Chapter 1451, Obliterated. Chapter 1451, Obliterated. That guy is so amazing. Both guild leaders actually came looking for him. Just who is he? The distant spectating players were shocked to see the two men. Solitary 9, who stood behind Shifeng, was at a loss for words. Both Thundering Sky and Sky Slicer were top-tier existences in Cold Wind City. Normally they were very difficult to meet, yet these two had gathered here due to Shifeng. "That's right. What business do you have with me?" Shifeng calmly replied to the guild leader's question. An army of 10,000 players might be shocking to ordinary players, but not even a million-player army could surprise Shifeng. Besides, they were still inside an NPC city. "Good. I never thought you would have the guts to admit it." Thundering Sky's face twitched in anger as he glared at Shifeng's calm composure. "I am Thundering Sky, the guild leader of Matchless Family. Since you admitted to killing my guild's experts, that makes things simple. Hand over every item and piece of equipment you have and let me kill you once. Then we'll consider the matter settled. Otherwise, bear the consequences at your own risk." "Guild leader, aren't you letting this brat off too lightly?" The guild leader's demand confused his upper echelons. They had assumed that Thundering Sky wouldn't rest until he forced this newcomer to delete his account. He had just offered to let Shifeng off with such a light punishment. "Enough. I have my reasons." Thundering Sky shot his subordinates a withering glare, immediately silencing them. What these guild upper echelons did not know was that Thundering Sky was far more interested in Shifeng's weapons and equipment than he was in avenging Featherwind. After watching the swordsman's battle video, he realized that the man's basic attributes were ridiculously high. Not even Thundering Sky was confident of killing Featherwind in one hit. After all, Featherwind's weapons and equipment were considerably good. The Elementalist's HP was also over 30,000. PvP battles were different from those with monsters. A player's damage would scale down when they struck another player. Killing expert players of the same level was very difficult. Yet Shifeng had done it. Moreover, he had thrown level 44 and 45 shield warriors with his normal attacks. His strength could definitely rival that of a great lord of the same level. With such powerful attributes, Shifeng had to have more than one top-tier weapon or piece of equipment. He might even have something Thundering Sky could use. However, if they killed this man while the soul lock debuff was active, Shifeng would only drop a few pieces of equipment. On the off chance that he had stored his items in the bank, they would lose any chance of obtaining them. "Ah. Fellow friend, ignore this man's foolish demands. If you join Centurion Dynasty, I guarantee that no harm will come to you within the Cold Wind City region," Sky Slicer said as he sent a contemptuous glance at Thundering Sky before turning back to Shifeng. "In addition, I'd like to offer you the position as our guild's main force vice commander." Insane. This is madness. I didn't hear wrong, right? Sky Slicer actually offered so much to an unknown expert. They haven't even been that generous to Lifeless Thorn. Sky Slicer's voice had been quite loud, so the spectating crowd had heard every word. The offer confused them. A guild's main force was a guild's core of power. The main force generally only answered to the guild leader. Not even vice-guild leaders had the authority to mobilize the main force. Hence, the main force's commander was even more important than the vice-guild leader. Although the vice-commander wasn't as important, it was still a crucial role. Sky Slicer had offered Shifeng such an important position right off the bat. "Slicer, do you intend to make an enemy of Matchless Family?" Thundering Sky shouted, enraged. Although he had expected Sky Slicer to oppose him, he hadn't expected the man to be so brazen about it. Have our guilds ever been friendly? Sky Slicer sneered. Their two guilds had fought countless battles against each other, and neither feared their rival. Now that he had an opportunity to suppress his rival's momentum and recruit a powerful expert, he couldn't miss the chance to kill two birds with one stone. Good. I'll take care of your Centurion dynasty as well. Thundering Sky's expression darkened. Immediately he commanded, "Everyone attack." Yes. Let's see who is afraid of whom. Sky Slicer also commanded his guild members to fight. For a time, the Matchless family and Centurion dynasty's members slaughtered each other inside the city. Due to so many players involved, the NPC patrols couldn't quell the incident quickly. They could only clear out the fighting players little by little. Both guilds' members fought with everything they had, fully intent on annihilating their enemy. Now that players were reaching higher levels, it was only a matter of time before they could raid the Snow Rift. To compete with guilds in other NPC cities, they first needed to deal with Cold Wind City's problems. Otherwise they would have to face enemies on both fronts. The entire street had transformed into a battlefield. Spells and arrows blotted out the sky, and explosions and screams filled the air. Unfortunately, as Centurion dynasty had brought fewer members, Matchless family quickly suppressed its players. As a result, the former guild's members were forced to retreat. Of course, Matchless family couldn't eliminate their rivals' members as Centurion dynasty's reinforcements began to arrive. All Matchless family could do was push the other guild back. Shortly after the battle had begun, the dead players' weapons and equipment littered the street. Even experts were forced to use their life-saving skills. The weaker players died before they could even react as numerous attacks struck. The spectators were stunned. This fight helped them realize just how weak an individual was compared to a guild. Even the well-known adventurer teams were nothing. Very quickly, Sky Slicer was forced into a corner. Meanwhile, Matchless family's members surrounded the auction house. Do you think that we can't touch you just because Centurion dynasty wants to lend a helping hand? Thundering Sky sneered at Shifeng, who had not participated in the battle. I guarantee you that no one can protect you in the Cold Wind City region. If you hand over all of your weapons and equipment now, I can still let you off the hook. If you try to retaliate, I'll eliminate you, Solitary 9, and his group hiding behind you. The watching crowd gasped when they heard Thundering Sky's threat. They all knew that Thundering Sky was a man of his word, but they hadn't expected him to be ruthless enough to target Solitary 9's group as well. However, as soon as Thundering Sky finished speaking, Shifeng, who had maintained a relaxed posture, unsheathed Killing Ray. He then casually walked towards Thundering Sky, who stood 50 yards away from him, as if he were just taking a stroll through his own backyard. What? He actually dares to defy Thundering Sky. Is he insane? Even Matchless family's members were stunned. Setting aside Thundering Sky's individual prowess, the man was surrounded by hundreds of his experts. These subordinates would likely kill the swordsman before he got close to their guild leader. You asked for this. Thundering Sky frowned. He hadn't thought this newcomer would be so foolish. He gestured with a hand and ordered, "Kill him." The instant Shifeng was within the ranged player's reach, over 100 spells and arrows flew towards him, forming a tight wall that left no room for Shifeng to dodge. However, Shifeng raised the sacred sword and swung it forward. Lightning edge. Suddenly, countless arcs of blue lightning streaked towards the incoming spells and arrows. In the blink of an eye, the lightning destroyed everything in a 50-yard cone. I am only one person. However, you can't just kill me because you want to, Shifeng calmly stated as he watched Thundering Sky and his numerous subordinates transform into particles of white light. Chapter 1452, Overwhelming Difference. Chapter 1452, Overwhelming Difference. Silence. It seemed as if time had stopped. The fighting players from both guilds froze as they stared at the particles of light that had once been Thundering Sky and his subordinates. All of a sudden, a large empty space had opened on the crowded street. Even now, faint arcs of electricity flickered around the clearing. In a single move, Shifeng had killed hundreds of Matchless family's players. Thundering Sky, who ranked among Cold Wind City's top 10 players, had died before their eyes. He hadn't even put up the slightest fight before he had died. It was hard to believe that an ordinary-looking swordsman with a blue longsword had been responsible for this. When Solitary 9 and the others who stood behind Shi Feng saw this, they could not help but gasp, the corners of their lips twitching slightly. They already knew that Shi Feng was very powerful, but it now seemed that Shi Feng hadn't taken his fight with Featherwind seriously. Just who is this guy? The corners of Sky Slicer's eyes twitched as he stared at the empty clearing a short distance away. He wouldn't have been so surprised if Shi Feng had been a magical class player. However, this was the first time he had seen a swordsman in God's domain possessing such a powerful skill. Moreover, this skill had such a short channeling time, giving the skill's targets no time to react. How is this possible? The guild leader died? Matchless Family's members were at a loss. Everything had happened too quickly. He killed our guild leader. We can't let him get away. That skill must have a long cooldown. He can't use it again anytime soon. Kill him. Suddenly, Matchless Family's members turned their attention away from Centurion Dynasty as they charged at Shi Feng. A guild leader was directly connected to the guild's reputation. The fact that this man had killed their guild leader instantly humiliated every one of them. If they did not kill Shi Feng right now, Matchless Family's reputation would suffer. This would severely impact their guild's development. Damn it! Matchless Family's players have lost their minds. Tension gripped Solitary 9 as he watched the players swarm towards him. However, before the Matchless Family's members reached their group, Shi Feng pointed killing ray at the approaching crowd. Dragon Breath. Suddenly, a beam of white light shot forth. The white light vaporized any player it touched. In the blink of an eye, several hundred more players had died. After using Dragon Breath, Shi Feng followed up with Dragon's Authority, inflicting the fear debuff on all enemies within a 50-yard radius, reducing their movement speed and attack speed by 40% for 1 minute. Everyone within the skill's range felt as if they had plunged into a muddy swamp, following which Shi Feng activated Defensive Blade, increasing his attack range. He then took a step forward and vanished. Where is he? As the crowd recovered from the shock and fear Shi Feng's Dragon Breath had inflicted, the man had disappeared. They could not help their growing confusion. However, before anyone had realized it, Shi Feng had reappeared among Matchless Family's members. He lightly swung his 2 swords at the nearby enemies. Boom! A tornado formed around Shi Feng, following which all players within 15 yards of Shi Feng collapsed, staring at their empty HP bars in a daze. Not even the MTs with high HP had escaped Shi Feng's wrath. Following which Shi Feng advanced once again. This time, however, he didn't execute void steps. Instead, he left numerous afterimages trailing behind him as he moved forward. At the same time, he brandished his swords without a care in the world, slaughtering every player that came within 15 yards. None of the players within his range escaped death's embrace. In fact, they couldn't even block or dodge the swordsman's attacks. One after another, Matchless Family's members transformed into particles of light. Shi Feng looked like a god of death as he claimed these players' lives. Nobody could even slow him down. Although the guild's ranged players tried to stop Shi Feng, their attempts were little more than a joke. They couldn't even keep up with Shi Feng's movements with their eyes, much less land an attack. They could only watch as particles of light floated in the air. He can't be a player. He must be a demon in disguise. He's a monster in human skin. We need to run. After a brief moment, Shi Feng had killed another several hundred players. Panic overwhelmed Matchless Family members as they watched Shi Feng reap their allies' lives. At this point, they had forgotten about avenging their guild leader and restoring their guild's reputation. They could only think of getting as far away from Shi Feng as possible. They had never seen such a terrifying player before. Compared to Shi Feng, the strongest boss monster they had ever faced looked cute. After all, they had some hope of damaging a boss. Against Shi Feng, however, they couldn't even resist. How was this supposed to be a PvP battle? This was just a one-sided massacre. Like frightened rats, the thousands of Matchless Family members scattered and fled in all directions. The players watching from a safe distance were stupefied. Before today, they had seen thousands of players pursue a single person. They had never watched one player chase after a 10,000-man army. This scene had shattered everything they had thought they knew about God's domain. Isn't he a little too strong? Just who is he? Solitary 9 was beyond shocked. An individual having the power to suppress an entire guild only ever happened in his dreams, yet he watched as that dream became a reality. What Solitary 9 did not know was that, while Cold Wind City's players might be stronger than those in God's domain as forgers, their weapons and equipment were nothing in comparison. To prove this point, not one player from Matchless family dropped an epic weapon or piece of equipment. The best they had was level 40 dark gold equipment. On the other hand, Shifeng wielded 3 fragmented legendary items. He was also a tier 2 player. With both advantages, the difference between Shifeng and his opponents was horrifying. As the other players from Aurora Sword watched Shifeng's massacre, an indescribable excitement bloomed in their chests. They were fully aware that Shifeng was a player. They fully intended to boast to their friends that they had met such a powerful expert. After around 30 seconds, the originally clogged street was empty of players. Only Shifeng and a bunch of weapons and equipment remained. The survivors from Matchless family had long since fled the battlefield. Despite so many items covering the street, none of the spectators moved forward to steam them. On the contrary, they distanced themselves from the loot, making sure that at least 100 yards lay between them and the nearest item. As for the NPC guards, they spared Shifeng little more than a glance before pursuing Matchless family's surviving members. In NPC cities, the NPC guards would target the side that attacked first. Matchless family members had teamed up before surrounding Shifeng. If any member of the team attacked, they would implicate the entire team in the crime. Hence, within a fixed amount of time, Shifeng could kill as many members of the team as he wanted without receiving any punishment from the system. Even if this mechanic hadn't existed, Shifeng could have simply found a secluded location and altered his appearance with the demon mask. With Nightwalker Cape's passive concealment effect, not even high-tiered NPC guards could touch him. After crushing Matchless family members, Shifeng didn't hurry to collect his loot. Instead, he smiled as he turned to Sky Slicer, who stood a short distance away, saying, "Guild Leader Slicer, now that the problem has been dealt with, may I know what business you have with me?" Chapter 1453, Unexpected Harvest. Chapter 1453, Unexpected Harvest. As Centurion Dynasty's members watched Shifeng walk towards them, their breath caught and cold sweat drenched their backs. It felt as if a prehistoric beast approached, not a player, and they desperately wanted to turn and flee. One man had inspired thousands of Matchless family's members to run like frightened rats. If someone had told them of such a thing happening in the past, they would have laughed it off. Now, however, they could not find it in themselves to laugh. They had clashed with the other guild many times and both were roughly on the same level. Since Shifeng could suppress Matchless family by himself, naturally he wouldn't have any issues doing so to Centurion Dynasty. Sky Slicer wore an ugly expression. Had he known something like this would happen, he would not have poked his nose into the situation. "Brother Expert, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. I only came here to recruit you because I have a grudge against Matchless family. If I had known that Brother Expert was so powerful, I would not have meddled in your affairs. For this offense, I am willing to pay 10,000 magic crystals as compensation," Sky Slicer respectfully told Shifeng. His previous pride had faded like smoke. "What a generous offer," Solitary 9 quietly exclaimed. In his opinion, Sky Slicer was insane to offer 10,000 magic crystals as an apology. Even a well-known adventurer team like Aurora Sword had only accumulated 2,000 magic crystals thus far. Meanwhile, magic crystals were an indispensable resource in Cold Wind City. For example, lifestyle players needed the crystals when producing weapons and equipment. To increase their production success rate, they would spend magic crystals on renting special workshops in their respective lifestyle associations. There was also the Divine Coliseum, and training there cost a lot of crystals. Magic crystals were nearly impossible to save. Although there were quite a few ways to obtain magic crystals in Cold Wind City, handing over 10,000 magic crystals would deal a considerably painful blow to Centurion Dynasty. However, Solitary 9 wasn't a guild leader, so he couldn't understand Sky Slicer's thought process. If an expert of Shifeng's caliber decided to target Centurion Dynasty and randomly ambush its main force or elite members, the guild would break under the loss. Moreover, Centurion Dynasty couldn't do anything to Shifeng. If such a situation lasted for a long time, it could cripple the guild. The 10,000 magic crystal offer also served to put some distance between Centurion Dynasty and Shifeng. 10,000 magic crystals? Shifeng was slightly confused. The resources in Cold Wind City were far more abundant than he had assumed. Both Centurion Dynasty and Matchless family would only be third-rate guilds on God's Domain's continent. Giving away 10,000 magic crystals would likely bankrupt the guild. However, based on Sky Slicer's expression, he only felt a slight pang at the loss. When the guild leader saw the small frown forming on Shifeng's face, he realized that the other party wasn't particularly satisfied with the compensation. Gritting his teeth, he said, "If Brother Expert doesn't find the compensation satisfying, I can include this map as well." Saying so, Sky Slicer took out an ancient, tattered animal skin. Although the hide was quite old, it emitted a faint pressure. Although there was only a trace of this pressure, everyone seemed to fear it. "This is divine might?" Shifeng stared at the animal hide in Sky Slicer's hands in surprise. Divine might was an aura unique to gods. Any item that radiated the energy wouldn't be ordinary. Furthermore, this item had manifested in the ice crystal world. Although this otherworld's rank was quite high, it could only accommodate up to Tier 5 creatures. Tier 6 gods were barred from this world. The fact that such an item, once used by God, had manifested here made it even more valuable. "Brother Expert, what do you think?" Sky Slicer asked, smiling when he saw Shifeng's interest in the animal hide. He had obtained this animal hide some time ago, but although he recognized it as valuable, he had no way to reveal its secrets. Using it to appease Shifeng and improve his relationship with the man wasn't a bad trade. "Deal?" Shifeng nodded. His goal in traveling to the ice crystal world was to obtain eternal ice crystals, not to dominate Cold Wind City. He had no reason to clash with the local guilds. If not for Matchless Family's determination to pick a fight, he wouldn't have bothered with them. Hearing Shifeng's reply, Sky Slicer breathed a sigh of relief. He then handed over the 10,000 magic crystals and the animal hide. As for the weapons and equipment littering the street, Shifeng decided to sell the items to Sky Slicer for coins and various rare materials. Weapons and equipment took up an entire slot by themselves in a player's bag space. However, materials didn't. One slot could hold multiple articles of the same item. By selling the weapons and equipment for materials, Shifeng could maximize the number of items he brought back to God's domain. Naturally, Sky Slicer was more than happy to accept Shifeng's offer. The Matchless family members that had cornered Shifeng earlier consisted of the guild's elites and experts. Most of the players that had fallen to Shifeng had been experts. Hence, the weapons and equipment they had dropped were considered top tier in Cold Wind City. Through this transaction, Shifeng had obtained close to 8,000 gold in rare materials. If he resold these materials in his home world, he could easily earn over 20,000 gold. However, Shifeng wouldn't sell all of the materials even for a single payment of 20,000 gold. These rare materials could help the candlelight trading firm's forgers improve quickly. The trading firm might even manage to nurture a master forger. After obtaining the materials, Shifeng quickly made his way to Cold Wind City's library. Meanwhile, news of Shifeng's triumph over the Matchless family quickly spread throughout Cold Wind City, shocking the resident players. "That guy is so awesome. Not only did he suppress Matchless family by himself, but even Centurion Dynasty treated him with respect. I wish I had half his strength." After this, Lifeless Thorn will have to relinquish his position as Cold Wind City's #1 expert. I wonder if this expert is accepting disciples? If he is or plans to start an adventurer team or guild, I'll be the first to apply. For a time, Cold Wind City's players heatedly discussed this newcomer. Meanwhile, a man wearing ice blue armor and wielding a purple spear faced off against a level 54, Great Lord-ranked demonic Frost Wolf in the Snow Rift, Cold Wind City's Forbidden Land. Despite the Frost Wolf's upper hand in speed and strength, it was helpless against this indifferent man. On the contrary, the player repeatedly restricted its movements. Because of this one man, the 20-man team following him easily dealt with the demonic Frost Wolf. Less than a minute after the fight had begun, the demonic Frost Wolf collapsed and dropped several items. The team members watched as their experience bars rose quite a bit. While the team rested, a heroic-looking female swordsman turned to the indifferent man, who rested with his eyes closed. Giggling, she said, "Lifeless, didn't you say that you're the strongest player in Cold Wind City? It seems that you have a rival now." "A rival?" Lifeless Thorn's eyes opened when he heard these words. Shaking his head, he said, "Cold Wind City's experts are clueless. They're nowhere near being a suitable rival for me." "I'm not talking about them," the female swordsman, Cleansing Whistle, responded. Revealing a leisurely smile, she said, "Weren't you boasting about how powerful you are? Do you think you can stand against 10,000 elites from matchless family? You've got to be kidding. You're talking about 10,000 elite players. Lifeless Thorn rolled his eyes. Then why do you claim to be invincible in Cold Wind City? Here, take a look at this. Not long ago, a swordsman expert single-handedly suppressed Matchless Family's army. Centurion Dynasty even offered him a gift as an apology, Cleansing Whistle said, giggling as she sent a copy of Shifeng's battle video to Lifeless Thorn. Although Lifeless Thorn wanted to refute Cleansing Whistle's words, he couldn't help his shock as he watched the battle video. How can there be such a powerful expert in the city? Well, hadn't you said something earlier about the swordsman class being crap? Now you know how powerful swordsmen are. Cleansing Whistle said, feeling a little proud when she saw the man's shock. He is powerful. He is on an entirely different level than I am, Lifeless Thorn straightforwardly admitted. The assassin's admission stunned Cleansing Whistle. She had thought the news would shake Lifeless Thorn's confidence, allowing her to get some payback for his insults towards her class. Before Cleansing Whistle could say more, Lifeless Thorn stood and took a return scroll from his bag. What are you doing? Cleansing Whistle asked curiously. Do you really have to ask? I'm going to look for that expert, Lifeless Thorn said, excitement flashing in his eyes. Are you mad? We wasted all that time to get here, yet you're going back just like that. Cleansing Whistle was astonished. However, ignoring her words, Lifeless Thorn activated the return scroll. He then transformed into a streak of light as he left the snow rift. Seeing this, Cleansing Whistle and the other team members had no choice but to take out return scrolls and head back as well. Meanwhile, in Cold Wind City's Nobles District, Shifeng impatiently took out the animal hide Sky Slicer had given him and carefully inspected as he traveled in an advanced carriage. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.